Hey everybody in chat. All right, not going to use my goofy voice. Hey, how's it going? So we have James, quote unquote, from PRC. Um he hasn't been able to have a formal discussion with anybody about PRC and basically racing in general. So we got him on the I guess you can call this a podcast. I don't, what would you want to call it?
An impromptu podcast on an obscure NASCAR '03 modding channel. Does that
Hell
work?
yeah. Yeah, that may as well. That's basically what we're doing right now. So, all right. Since we did kind of talk about it before we went live, we need to kind of introduce who you are. So you went by the name James on Pretend Race Cars, but that's not obviously your real name. So if you want to explain to everybody why you use the name James and who you actually are, I think that would be a pretty good start.
Well, my name is Austin Noganoski. I'm the son of Castor Raceway's old track photographer, Cheryl Noganoski. I created PretendRaceCars.net 3 years ago now during the NFL playoffs, and I wrote under the name James, which is what a lot of people know me as just across, I don't know, Reddit and PRC and a bunch of different sim racing communities. I chose that route because at the time when I started the site, I was working for a rental car company, and they were very, very picky about what you posted on social media. And I mean, they didn't, they obviously didn't want to see, people wasting time at work, writing on a video game website. So I figured if I wrote under a fake name, they wouldn't be able to Google me and see that, holy shit, this kid's, at work writing these fucking 4,000 word articles and wasting a bunch of time.
Yeah.
And I mean, with the amount of turnover we had, there's a chance you get some asshole who comes to work and he's like, "Oh, this guy, I googled his name when I went home, and he writes about video game NASCAR when he's off work." And I didn't want any of that shit happening. I mean, like I'm in my mid-20s. I have a Tinder account. I don't want girls googling my name and seeing this as what I do as a hobby, right? So it was really just to avoid like those basic interactions. But there wasn't anything like diabolical behind it. It was just like let's go with a pen name so like I can geek out and not worry about some chick being like, "Wow, you're kind of a nerd. I don't want to talk to you anymore." That kind of shit. That was what was behind that.
Well, good thing we got that out of the way. So we're calling you Austin for the rest of the podcast, but the podcast will go up with the name James since everybody knows you by that. But you're Austin. Hello, Austin.
Hi. Holy shit, we're actually going to do this.
Yeah, so obviously everybody knows that you're from Pretend Race Cars and that you were basically, you almost became like the bad boy of sim racing because of your opinions. Like if you had a crazy opinion, people would either say that you're crazy or stupid, but then other people loved your website and they would come there pretty much every day to see if you've posted anything, if you have a different opinion than everybody else on something. So how did you start Pretend Race Cars, and why did you keep doing it for so long? Like, did you get any sort of enjoyment out of making people angry, or did you like being able to talk to people and get your opinions out there about sim racing?
Well, like I tell different versions of how I started PRC to different people because there's a couple of reasons why it started. For the longest time, and even now, still I talk to some of these guys. I hung out at TeamSpeak, just kind of what we're doing on Discord right now, with a group of guys who were big iRacers back in the day. We're talking before the Peak Series was called the Peak Series. And there's about a group of 4, 5, maybe 6 of us that all just kind of hung out. And over, a period of months, we're all just like, man, these games are boring. These games aren't finished. And I wish I could take full credit of being the one to kind of have the opinion that, yo, like, what the fuck are we doing, with our spare time? Why are we playing these, half-finished games? That credit actually goes to two guys by the name of Chris DiBenedetto from Sal Rossi from New York. And we were playing Assetto Corsa one night, and we were just hot lapping because at the time that was really all you could do in that game. And we were just running, some hot lap server in, online lobby, and we were just bored. And Sal was like, "What the fuck are we doing?" And we eventually just stopped racing, and we would sit on TeamSpeak just night after night, being like, "Man, what's happening to this hobby?" And at that time, I was going through some stuff in my personal life that required a lot of writing, and I hated what was going on, but I loved the writing part of it. And I think the final straw was during the NFL playoffs in 2015. The games were just so fucking horrible. And I think SB Nation actually covered one of the games. It was like their video, the worst NFL playoff game. That I just said, you know what? This, kind of desire to be like, man, like, I wonder if anyone else feels this way about the hobby that we do. Coupled with some of the stuff going on with Gamergate at the time, which, for those who maybe need a refresher, it was people found out that a lot of reviews were basically being bought and sold behind the scenes. I just said, I'm going to start my own website. I got enough free time. I need something to take my mind off the stuff going on in my personal life. And I want to, share how I feel about the hobby and how we feel about the hobby with others and see if they feel the same way. So that's really what started that. It was this kind of like meshing of all these different worlds kind of colliding at the same, really within the same month. And I was just like, fuck it. I'm going to start my own website and just write. Now, the second part, why I carried on for so long, at the end of the day, I just loved writing. I mean, there are a lot of people say, you had vendettas against certain devs, and that's kind of why you maintain the site. In reality, I was making about $100 US per month from the ad revenue. It was fuck all. I was paying for my truck insurance, but I just enjoyed the fact that I could sit down and write an article that people enjoyed and got them talking, and they would post comments and either agree or disagree with it. And I just love that. I just thought it was cool, and that's really all it was to it. And for the longest time, really up until 2017, as I mentioned earlier, I worked at a rental car place with really lax cell phone rules, and sitting on WordPress typing out these fucking odysseys on my phone killed a lot of the day, and it just made the workday go by quicker. That's all there was to it.
That's pretty. It seems like you would.
It was so simple.
Yeah, like people try to, especially since the closing, they like to think that like, the website was created around you wanted to start controversy, because it did kind of start controversy from time to time.
Oh yeah.
But it was more or less because I'm bored and I like this topic. Let's see if other people agree with me or disagree with me, and we can start a conversation. People made you almost into this like mythical creature in sim racing, if that makes sense. Like, so
I almost see it. The more I've read about Star Citizen, and the more I've helped my buddy navigate through that community, because my buddy's got a couple grand in that game and he's in the process of going through a refund. So I did my part to kind of research what the fuck's going on over in their neck of the woods. And the more I kind of dove into that community, the more I'm like, oh, I was like Derek Smart, but like a cross between him and Vince McMahon. As like, because I mean, like, let's be real here. The comments section on PRC was basically a wrestling ring. That's what it was. And you had all these different dudes like signing up as like Kim Jong-un and like these fucked up like personalities and shit, and like making custom avatars just to fight with people, and it was fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like the articles themselves it was Derek Smart with race cars.
That makes sense. That's a good description, because yeah, when you would look through the comments, people were just like, either it was trying to, rip somebody a new asshole that happened to disagree, or it would actually sometimes devolve into like a really good conversation between each other, and there was like no good mix. Like it would be one way or the other.
I'm fully aware that like when people would go take a shit at work and they would spend like 3 hours, over the span of a month just shitting and reading PRC. That was the best feeling, knowing that. I remember when I shut down the site, people were like, what am I going to do on my coffee break? I'm like, yes, that's what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to read the site on your coffee break. It was fucking awesome.
Yeah. So obviously now we have to transition into why PRC happened to close, because it was like out of nowhere. Nobody really knew what the real reason was, but you have talked about it in the past. But if people don't know, why did Pretend Race Cars shut down? And obviously there's going to be somebody who wants to know if you would ever bring something like that back. So or
this story's not as fun as I think a lot of people are expecting. I mean, everything I've posted on Twitter about why the site closed, and I think Will Marsh of Sim Racing Paddock covered it. That's the truth. Like, it's a boring story, but it's basically like, I mean, working with SMS for the final year of the site, it always looked kind of shitty because you have this one employee for this one gaming company shitting on all these other rival products. And even if like the reviews are accurate, right? Like if I review Dirt 4 and I don't give it a good rating, but there's other people on Steam, also not giving it a good rating, it still looks scummy, right? But whatever. But it basically got to the point where people from all these different development teams of games that I'd shit on for one reason or another, we're basically, talking to SMS behind the scenes and being like, yo, like this is scummy. Like, come on, guys. Not that there's anything illegal about it, just that it's shitty. And the last article I wrote was on Iracing's Rallycross, and of course, within a day, they sent an email. And again, no legal threats, there's no fun shit to talk about here. It's a shitty anticlimactic end to the site. But Ian just messaged me, and he's just like, man, like, now that Iracing sent me an email, like, everyone sent me an email, and like I feel bad, like I'm pissing off friends in the industry, and like I don't want to like have to keep justifying why you have the site open, because like you're working for us. I want to be able to say that you're a good employee for us and you're finding lots of bugs for us, and we're happy to have you on the team. And it basically became a decision of, do you want to have a career with a gaming studio, or do you want to run a blog for $100 a month? And at the end of the day, it's like, you know what, I've really said all I can say at this point, so killed the site. That was that.
I mean, it's gonna sound out of left field. I kind of wanted to ask you it last time we almost had like an impromptu podcast, but this one's a little bit more formal, so I'm gonna ask you this one, this time around. But do you feel like iRacing kind of knew that like if they sent another email that was basically like, hey, you're kind of fucking shit up, like you're kind of making everybody have problems with each other, that more or less it would kind of get you to stop? Or do you think it was just like the coincidental, hey, it's time anyway type of thing? Or do you think like in some way, shape, or form they could have had some sort of malcontent with that email?
Well, I mean, like I know the content of those emails. Again, it wasn't even legal threats. It was just like, man, like this is shitty. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that like mere months after the site gets shut down, there's talk of this 6-figure prize money esports tournament payout. I mean, anyone can figure out what kind of damage PRC was possibly doing to the industry. But I think like from my point of view, like I was getting tired of running it. I was getting tired of writing articles about a genre I was getting kind of pissed off at, because it was just every day it was something new. Especially during the final year, where you have guys like pretending to be esports superstars and building fake NASCAR cockpits in their room for more than the cost of a real car. I think I almost have to thank iRacing. It's like they picked the right time to do it.
That makes sense, because I mean, yeah, it's almost, sim racing is a double-edged sword, because it can be great. You can meet great people and, develop a friendship, and you can also get a great job and have fun doing it. But you can also run into those little, I don't, gremlins would be a good word. Like that comes to mind, where you just, it kind of takes a toll after a while. Like personally, I don't know exactly, how your situation would have felt, but if I were writing stuff that you were writing, especially with actual developers and businessmen from companies, if they were emailing and being like, hey, you're kind of fucking shit up, then I would be like, you know what, I'm just sitting here saying what I think. Like, if that actually affects your business, then, that's not my problem. Like, did you ever think that, like, it was never your problem? Like, if you're just a guy writing the shit and then somebody goes out there and actually acts out this, like, I guess they were trying to think of it like as a form of business terrorism, like, do you feel any way responsible for any of that, or do you just not care? Like, because me personally, I wouldn't give a shit. Like, that's their problem.
Well, I mean, for me, you gotta think, when I started the website when I was 22 or 23, and now I'm 25, so I've kind of grown up with the site, and my opinions on shit have changed over the years.
Yeah.
I still think that if you don't want people to say, bad things about you on the internet, whether it's you as a person or a video game you've made, you should either just be a nice person or make a good video game. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple. behind the scenes, I obviously know how much I've affected the industry. That's not something I'm ever going to release to the public. Nobody knows. I know. The end. And I would say for the first week after PRC was down, I didn't want to see anything. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to see. If you go on like Rotten Tomatoes and read movie reviews, I didn't want to read that. I didn't want to see commercials that said, some Star Wars Battlefront game is 10 out of 10 game of the year. I didn't want to see, truck reviews if, my parents or my buddy's parents are shopping for a vehicle, because I knew, I kind of knew what was going on behind the scenes. And Gamergate, again, I hate bringing that up because people are going to call me a sexist or whatever, but Gamergate was right about a lot of stuff in terms of how the whole review scene works. And I just felt really disgusted by it. But at the same time, like I said, with me knowing what I know personally about the industry and the ways in which I'd affected it, I said, you know what? Maybe it was a good call to shut down the site, because if I would have kept going and kept my due diligence up, or I guess maybe just diligence, because due diligence is like a safety term.
Yeah.
If I would have kept being diligent in my articles and kept posting, and covering some of the issues that I haven't covered now because the site's not around, in 2 or 3 years, we're looking at a sim racing climate that's just totally different. I mean, it's like I said, I know what I know, and I'm not sharing it with anyone. But it was a holy shit moment. So I definitely, I definitely had to take a step back and be like, you know what, like maybe we should just kind of let this die.
Yeah.
But I do have to say, like, I was definitely really angry for the first few days, because I was like, this whole thing's a smoke and mirror show.
I mean, it's going to be... I guess what I have to ask you, even though you said you wouldn't share any of it about how you changed the industry, do you think that you were changing it for the better, or do you think it could have went both ways? Like,
it's varying shades of gray. I mean, when you look at what I was doing on PRC, it's essentially glorified QA testing bundled with sensationalist articles. For example, me saying an example of an article I give was I found the optimal pressure for the GT3 tires in the Assetto Corsa was incorrect, and all I really did was I emailed the Red Dragon, I think is Pirelli World Challenge team. I was just like, what are you guys running your tires at when you leave the pits? And they gave me a value, and then I just did an article saying, how is this game dev putting all this time and effort in developing a game and getting the optimal pressure of the tires wrong, when I just emailed this team and got the numbers within 5 minutes. So I think me doing that, it kind of kicked some people in the asses and was just like, like maybe we should, try just a bit harder to get our product up to snuff. But in a bad way, you have to look at, how what was posted on PRC affects backer business deals. I mean, if you're, let's say you're Red Bull, and you're looking to sponsor, or iRacing's courting you to sponsor a like a $10,000 Rallycross championship. They have their Peak Series and the World Grand Prix Series. Let's say they want Red Bull in on this for a third championship, and Red Bull goes to Google and they Google iRacing Rallycross review, and they find PRC, and a guy's talking about traction rolling and being able to baby the cars around the corner in 6th gear, and you're quicker that way. And you have people in the comments saying, "Oh yeah, I tried the Rallycross and it's shit, and I don't like it. And I went back to Dirt 4." If they see that, there's a chance that they're not going to get that 17K whatever in prize money from Red Bull to sponsor the series. And at the end of the day, it's like that affects the genre negatively, because you can't, at the end of the day, you can't hold an esports tournament with a big prize money. You can't promote it with the help of a big energy drink company. And then you just think of how much this might have happened throughout the industry, and then, well, there's the issue.
So, I mean, that's really interesting, because it's almost like you kind of need a mixture of both of those things. Like how you were saying,
Yep.
This is super easy for you guys to figure out, for your physics to actually be completely accurate. Like, it took me 5 minutes to go and figure out the real value, but you guys are using the wrong one. What's with that? Like,
Yep.
Are you just lazy, or do you just not really care that much? Like,
Yeah.
But then you also have, how you were saying, backroom deals with, big corporation type sponsors. You can affect that type of business if one if one review happens to get out super far. People are like, well, fuck that. I don't want to be a part of it. If it's like that, I don't want to even touch it. It's a disease. Like if if we could only have like a good mixture, then maybe the whole entire industry in general would be completely different. And I think that's what you tried to allude to, where
Yeah.
you were saying, man, I could have done a lot, and I did.
Yeah.
But you, as you were saying, at the end of the day, it was a good thing, and it was also a bad thing for your site to close.
Yeah.
Do you ever think in the future that you would ever open up another site like that, or are you completely done with that whole shebang that you were doing?
Well, at the moment, I'm signed on with SMS till the end of 2020 or
Yeah.
the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. So I'm going to be with these guys for a few years. And, with the amount I play PCARs 2 and some of their other stuff they're working on daily, I really don't want to play racing games more at the end of the day. I don't
Yeah.
want to write about racing games more at the end of the day. Like, I already do that for 8.5 hours a day because I'm contractually obligated to, right?
Yeah.
But I think PRC's, goal, from the very start was basically to kick people in the ass on the review side and get them to report on the genre in a more honest and very upfront way and not use it as, I guess, third-party marketing fluff pieces. And near the end of PRC's lifespan, I started to see that, and I was really happy about it. The first example I'll give, and it's going to be a very strange example because I work for this company, but Paul, I think his name's Paul Jeffrey from Race Department, gave P-Cars a horrid review. And I mean, he's, like, how the fuck can they release something, I'm paraphrasing here, but, how can they release something, where the AI cars are 5 seconds off pace in the rain or they're too fast in the rain, and it just completely destroyed my experience, and, like, how could they release such a thing? And I mean, obviously, like, the guys that worked on P-Cars are choked because it's a really, really hurtful and aggressive review, but I was like, you know what, we need more of this. Like, we need more of people coming out and just saying, what they think about, this game.
Yeah.
And I felt like for a long period of time, I was the only guy doing it. And I was just, even though it was a game I, helped QA test, I was happy that someone was like, hey, we can write a review in the style of PRC and it's okay. And I was happy to see that. Like, it's weird, Another example I'll give is the Scott Speed saga, which has been all over the place over the past week and a half. And obviously the story, for those who are watching this later on or they haven't really paid attention, Scott Speed is an iRacing rep. He's a brand ambassador, you could call him, who's in promo material for the game. He helped work on the physics for the game, and someone in a live stream busted him being a complete shit cunt to other people. And I feel like if not for PRC making these kind of articles almost tolerable or like normal, or that it's something that is acceptable to write about, I think 2 years ago, if this would have happened, no one would have covered it. Everyone would just shut up about it because they're scared of iRacing coming after them and saying, like, we'll take away your beta access or previews of upcoming content for you to cover if you post a story. But now with PRC writing basically what are drama posts, I think that gave people, the light bulb that, hey, we can cover this Scott Speed story and we can say, yeah, this guy's a fucking asshole, and put him on blast for 10 minutes. And I think, seeing articles like that now, it's like, I don't think PRC needs to come back. People are starting to get that what was posted on PRC was okay.
Do you happen to enjoy working with SMS? Like, I know that behind the scenes when we talked about it,
Yeah.
that you were saying that they give you a lot of leeway to be yourself and to have your own opinions. Do you think that should be a template that most sim racing companies should have in general, like where they allow you to be negative if you need to and to be positive if you need to? Or do you think that, like, there is a reason for having that type of, like, not necessarily, like, the word kiss ass came to mind, but that's not a great description, a company man. Do you think that there needs to be a mix, or do they need to let you be people, I guess?
I think companies need to let you be people. I mean, the whole reason video games have progressed to where they are today is because of competition. And I mean, sometimes, even in other genres, developers do shit talk each other. Developers do have little wars with each other. I can think back to when Sega was working on and 2K were working on the ESPN NFL games back when it was 2K versus Madden. And man, those guys hate each other. They tried to undercut each other every year. There was a year 2K Sports came out with their NFL game. It was $20, and Madden was like, holy shit, and that kind of little rivalry even if it does get a little hostile and there's like shitstorms between developers on race department forums or such, like man, that's good for the industry. Man, that's awesome. You have developers constantly trying to one up each other. They're looking at each other from across the room or whatever, being like, yeah, like we're gonna get you this year. That's fucking great because you know who wins? Customer wins because I end up getting good games out of it. But working for SMS, I mean, they've been fucking lovely to me. I mean, especially with how they got basically destroyed on PRC. To meet some of these guys, I mean, they're super passionate about the game. They've been really friendly. Like there hasn't even been like any animosity between a coworker or two because he's like, this fucking guy from PRC, fuck him. Like they've been amazing to me. Like it's been unbelievable.
That's good to hear because you know what, you are right when you explain it the way that you just did. You need competition within different companies that are making these games to actually make them not only physically accurate with their suspension, their tires, their chassis, overall making the game really enjoyable to play. That can also affect the entire like video game industry as a whole, because I mean, sim racing is relatively small, but it could end up bursting and becoming more popular. So if we have great games, then it's good for everybody. It's good for the industry. It's good for everybody playing them.
Yeah.
But to almost retract back to the original question, you did answer it pretty concise, but like, do you happen to think that maybe the industry would almost be better off with like having developers themselves, almost pretty much every article, it being them explaining what I like, what I don't like, instead of it just being like a change log every time? Because doesn't that get a little bit old? Like if you see a change log and it's almost like the same old shit every time.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like the changelog culture, I'm not a fan of because basically I don't read it. I can't stand, and my buddy Ethan's been really good at making jokes of this. I can't stand these like mile long change logs where it's like, yeah, we changed the rotational inertia of the tire by 0.014. Like, fuck you. Like, I'm bored.
Yeah.
These are race cars. These are fucking cool things to drive, man. Like, this is boring. What the fuck you think this is? Flight sim? Like, no.
Well,
But I don't really know in that regard. I do think there should be a push to make sim racing more fun.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand how these mile long change logs as like these huge news pieces that everyone should get excited for. I don't really understand how that's fun.
Yeah. I don't really either because excuse me. I don't really either because like you were saying, when you're just reading pretty much like the math behind it, it's like, great, you're telling me what you actually changed, but like, it's almost like, explain it to me in English, okay? Like, what is this going to change? How is it going to benefit the actual game? Like, but also, is this relatively accurate to reality, like the way that you changed it? What is it going to implicate? Like, does it take the chassis out of the equation? Does it put more emphasis on the tires? What does it do? It just feels like there's a lot of information that could be explained in a more fun way so people would actually pay attention to it, because I'm like you, I don't like seeing that shit. It's boring. It is boring.
Well, one of the things these developers don't realize is that for the people who actually do read the change logs, it actually starts undoing everything the marketing department's worked for. And I think you'll know what I'm talking about when it comes to this. So a lot of these developers, and it doesn't matter which one we're talking about here, will say that their game is the most accurate. That's like the general, step number one in promoting a racing sim. Say it's authentic real life physics. But then you read the change logs and it's like, okay, so if this game's so realistic, how come you went through 10 tire models?
Yeah.
Like, I read the change log, so it's like, it was super realistic when it came out, but then in the change log you said you rewrote the tire model from scratch. So was the first tire model unrealistic, or is the second one? Like, what the fuck are you doing here? You know?
Yeah, that's completely true, because, I mean, to use this as a segue, obviously we've seen sim racing companies use that moniker that we are the best, this is the most realistic, we do everything to a T, laser scan, all this great shit, but then you have a product that comes out and it's like a Frankenstein monster. Like it's good sometimes, but then it's also like it can come out horrendous. Like, a mutation. So obviously that means that we have to talk about the big boy. They
Oh god.
describe themselves as a big boy, but how do you feel majoritively about iRacing? Like, what do they do that you like, and what are the things that they do that you dislike?
So straight up, iRacing is a social media tool slash outlet slash social media platform for auto racing fans. It is the absolute. It's Facebook for people who like race cars.
Yeah,
I met my crew chief on there. Most of my online friends I met through iRacing. It's how you meet other people who like to race clean. I mean, there are people I met on iRacing who we'd go play NHL with, or we'd go on Xbox and play like Need for Speed with, and have these amazing races. Because what iRacing does is it brings all these people together who love racing, who love clean racing, who love organized racing, and it puts them all on one website. That's the best thing iRacing does. I would love to say that their ELO system is incredible, but what they've actually done is they've just taken the same ELO system that you saw on Project Gotham Racing on the original Xbox. Because a lot of games on the first Xbox Live, they all used ELO rank, which is just what you see in chess. Which I don't know why. I don't know why no one used after the first Xbox Live period, but whatever. iRacing gets at least some props for bringing Elo rank to sim racing because it was smart. Yeah, that's what worked on Xbox. Let's try it in sim racing, and oh, look at that, it works again. The safety rating is interesting. I think it could be refined, but I think the actual concept of progressing by driving clean, that was a game changer. That put a lot of people's heads in the right place for in terms of pack racing. And I think at the end of the day, just them having these scheduled races that brought a lot of people together, I think that was a game changer as well. Because as we talked about before, sim racing isn't popular. This isn't Call of Duty where it's 4 a.m. when you're on a coke bender and you jump on. There's 50,000 people online to play with. That doesn't happen in sim racing. I mean, there's some cars, especially in iRacing, you're lucky if you get one official race a week.
yeah,
So the whole idea that races can start at scheduled times and you can come home from work and it's 4:48 and you're like, oh, I'm going to join the cup race at 6. That's fucking awesome.
yeah,
And why the fuck no one else is doing that aside from Gran Turismo Sport? Like, let's say iRacing came out in 2009. Scheduled start time should have been in every single game in 2011. But I mean, hey, fucking all the power to them. Like they worked that shit out and it was awesome and people fucking love that shit. So as like I said, as a social media platform for connecting with other people who love racing games, iRacing is the best. Holy shit, they nailed that. For the safety rating system, could be better, but it put a lot of people's heads in the right places and made people, for the most part, drive cleaner. I mean, I could contradict myself all day on that, but in a generic terminology speaking, they nailed that aspect. And of course, bringing over LO rank to sim racing, man, that's awesome. It sorted people the way it should. Sure, some people have egos and stuff, and top split truck races are kind of a clusterfuck. But besides that, it's done its job, and it's generally been awesome. What I don't like, and this is really just 2 points actually. First, I don't like the marketing. Second, I don't like the physics. And we can go whichever direction we go there.
let's start with the marketing first, because that's where I've always had a problem. I've talked about it in the past on my own channel where it seems like it's almost like brainwashing in like a really really simple way, where if we promote it out the ass and say, okay, this is the best thing ever, this is the best thing ever, then everybody's going to start saying, well, maybe it is the best thing ever. Like, and then you get this, like, it's almost like sometimes if you go on the forum and you say something that people don't necessarily agree with, it's almost cultish. Like, they'll attack you from each way from Sunday. So, like, how do you feel about the marketing in a more explained way that maybe does it hurt the industry as a whole, or is it just like they did a shitty job and they couldn't think of something better, so let's just say, oh, it's the best thing that's ever happened?
Well, their trailers are awesome, and the way they kind of promote it with this kind of like the modern symphony kind of tracks that they have,
Yeah,
whoever they have for video editing is awesome.
yeah,
Like there's nothing wrong with the trailers, but it's more the principle of if you're gonna promote yourself as the top dog, you better make sure your game is fucking perfect. Like, I mean, when Call of Duty goes out and promotes itself, right? When they do the advertisement saying how great the game is and how much it sold.
Yeah.
I mean, like when you fire up a game of Call of Duty, you generally have fun and you're like, yeah, I can see why this is marketed as the biggest first person shooter ever. Or I mean, for a better example, Halo back in the day. Man, like when Halo 3 came out and all those trailers dropped and said, holy shit, get ready for Halo 3, and you finally put the game in your Xbox disk drive, yeah, it lived up to that. iRacing really, in my opinion, I don't think it does. And that's where the marketing, in my opinion, falls flat. Is they promote themselves very, very highly, and their videos are beautiful. They do a great job with the editing and the way they get their name out there, like with all the liveries you'll see in different forms of racing. Like everyone knows the red, white, and blue iRacing livery. It's great, but when you make claims like that, when you go out and promote yourself as the best, you have to be the best. And if you're not, you're gonna have people like me, or people like people on the Steam forums, or people on the iRacing forums, or people in race department. They're just gonna be like, no, it's not.
Yeah, I feel you. That's one thing that I do agree with wholeheartedly. Like you have to have the best product out there. Like you almost have to be positive. And there's not really like a certain science to have the best
Yeah,
product or to know that you have the best product, but you have to be making really big steps to say, "Okay, I'm this." But
yeah.
do you feel like they've done that um they were a little bit too eager to jump on that moniker, like we have the best sim.
Yeah.
Like
I feel it's very close to what EA does with Madden right now. I mean, you'll see yearly when Madden NFL commercials come out. They always talk about how great the game is. They always talk about how realistic and lifelike the game is. But in 30 seconds, I can find you Ryan Moody's channel and show you 200 Madden glitch videos where it's just a complete clusterfuck on the field.
yeah.
And then you also have to bring up the point that, oh yeah, EA bought the exclusive rights to the NFL, so nobody can even try and make an alternate NFL game. So there's always these little asterisks, beside all of Madden's marketing claims. And I feel it's very much the same with iRacing.
I do too, because like like I said, they can be pretty good or they can be pretty bad. Like when we actually get into the topic of discussion that we had previously, where we'll get into that. I won't give any spoilers, but
Yeah,
you know, you think that if they wanted to make absolutely sure that they were, the best service, because they like to call themselves a service, and it is, if they were the best service out there for sim racing, that they would try to make changes that would make them so, instead of just the marketing, because they really, kind of to me, are only marketing, if that makes sense. Like their physics are hit or miss, like, and most of the time it's miss. But like, what's the word that I'm looking for? How am I trying to explain this?
there's not a lot of substance to what the marketing says.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Why do you think that is? Do you think that they're just completely lazy, or do you think that they just don't have it? Like, what? How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's just a very good marketing department. And I mean, I know from my connections in iRacing, there's a lot of, maybe not the highest staff turnover rate,
Yeah,
but I mean, like, there's definitely like changing physics guys behind the scenes. Like it's just a workplace, right? So as people come and go, sometimes there are some months where you're looking for a new physics guy and you can't make updates because you're in transition. That's just what a company goes through. But I think at the end of the day, like, I mean, even NASCAR 03 and Grand Prix Legends had some flaws. I mean, GPL, which is regarded as one of the best sims to date, shipped with setups that were almost undrivable,
yeah,
and the community had to unfuck back in 1998 the ride height. People found out that, hey, all our cars are bottoming out and it's making the cars like death traps. But if you raise the ride height on the default sets, it's fine. And I mean, even with NASCAR 2003, the ability to get draft locked, and how Daytona and Talladega, you just run the bottom and you win the race. There's all these little gremlins that pop up. I just think that at the end of the day, making video games is a bit difficult, and sometimes it just happens that you don't have all the boxes ticked.
yeah. So now we're gonna transition into the parts where, I mean, it's just it's fucking insanity because I never personally heard specifically about the setup creation, how that was done, but I've been bitching about that for years because it's not hard. Like it really isn't hard to build a setup that is relatively good for fixed racing because you don't want it too tight, but you don't want it too loose, but you don't want it to be on a rail. It has to be challenging in certain aspects. Both of those need to come into one, and that can be difficult every once in a while. But when you told me what I guess you're gonna have to re-explain again since we're doing the stream, how like who do they employ for the setups and like do you think that they could do a better job than what they've been doing? Like it for lack of a better word, it's kind of gross the way that they do it and the way that you explained it to me how it works. So explain to the people watching what they do for setups and who they employ for them.
Well, to start, I basically have to say where I get my sources from.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people when I speak on iRacing, they just think like I'm a Derek Smart figure who just says shit out of his ass. So basically, when I was active on iRacing, I ran very well in the K&N cars, and just by chance, had guys invite me to their team speak, and I met people who were either on the cusp of being in the Peak Series or in the Peak Series, just by being good at the feeder series and stomping some guys down there on the short tracks. So I got exposed to a lot of people that are high up, and it's names that straight up some probably don't want them to be shared. For example, I know Brody. I haven't met him personally, but Brody Kostecki's one of the guys I've met on TeamSpeak and stuff like that. Ryan Luza, the 2017 Peak champion, like that's our guy kind of thing. My real world crew chief was Ryan Luza's virtual crew chief last year. There's been a couple guys, like I know Dan Roper uses our TeamSpeak sometimes. Like guys in the Peak Series, I know and I get stuff filtered out from them to me. So in regards to who makes some of the very awful, atrocious fixed setups on iRacing that a lot of people will complain about. I mean, you'll even see it on like the iRacing subreddit. Guys will be like, did you drive the B car this week? This setup sucks. The common running joke that I've heard from several people, black stripe drivers, pro drivers, that sort of thing, is that it's not the high up guys running in the Peak Series making the setups. It's just their group of like hardcore testers. Now, who are these testers? It's guys who are like 600 to 1,000 iRating. It's guys who aren't very good, and they just kind of hobble something together, and in some cases don't touch it from build to build. Even if there's been a fundamental change to the car's physics, they'll just leave it as is. So a lot of the complaints, at least from what I've been told, I have to be careful not to fuck myself in any way.
Yeah.
From what I've been told, a lot of the reason you have these really bad default baseline setups, like where the late models carrying the left front tire at Las Vegas, is it's because the guys that are working on these setups are like some of the worst sim racers imaginable, but they have the free time to be iRacing testers.
That like it's almost a shock, like because when I heard that, it explains so much. Because personally, myself, I do the asphalt stock car more than anything else. So the A car, which is the Gen 6 car, the B car, which is the Xfinity car, and then C, which is the truck. Like fixed racing, it's really fun because you're all on the same playing field, which everybody loves because it shows who can do what with what they've got, and that's fun. But when you told me that it's like 600 iRating to like 1,000, I was like, holy fuck, like what a what a bad choice, because there's so many reputable people in the community that could do such a better job that it's like, why even waste the time letting these people do it when you could easily find somebody else who could make a setup in like 10 minutes that would be almost perfect for doing fixed racing. Like
part of that reasoning,
yeah.
And I'll defend iRacing here because I kind of understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Part of that reason is because the service is so competitive.
Yeah.
And you're paying out these thousands of dollars in championship prize money. You can't afford to have someone from that series have a beta build where they know every single thing about the new build and the new cars 6 weeks before anyone else does, and that could just fuck up the playing field. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
So I kind of understand why they get these. I don't want to call them part timers, but we'll call them scrubs rather. I kind of understand why these scrubs are messing with the fixed setups and why they're building them, and why people are then going on the forums and being like, "What the fuck? This car drives awful this week."
Yeah. I mean, like, I almost, when you told me the first time, I had to think about it because I was like, okay, why would they do that? Could they be doing it because this is the majority of people who run these series, or is it just because, okay, like, do you need that mixture of, like, bad and good at the same time? Because people can figure their way around it, but I mean, when they're so undrivable, like the B
Yeah.
car last season, where it was a fucking ice tire fest, and then they had setups that were like you would either spin or push into the wall. Like it was horrific. And I was like, who are making these setups? Like, why is it like this? So when you explain that, I was just like, oh, that makes perfect sense. But I also get where you're coming from. Like, I don't necessarily mean people who are like the absolute best. You know what I mean? Like, they
Yeah.
don't need to be making the setups. But if they found anybody within, like, I don't know, the 2000 I rating and not anywhere near above like 25, that would almost be perfect because they're more than likely the people driving those cars often, but not super serious about it. So I still don't understand like why they would go the route of having, you know, almost, lack of a better term, terrible drivers do make the setups. Like, do they even understand how the car is like in reality, and do they understand how it works in the sim? Like, it blows my mind that, you know, people that are 600 to 1000 I rating are making the setups. It really does explain a lot. Like, it's almost a travesty if if that's a word that I'm allowed to use for that situation. Like, do you feel like that the developers should make setups rather than, you know, just some beta tester who happens to be a beta tester that doesn't really play all that often? Or, like, is there any way around it that could be done differently that would improve the racing and overall, like, the setup so people aren't screaming and shouting on the forum?
Well, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what exact technique they employ. I just know from several people that the whole 600 to 1,000 I rating thing is like the inside joke, because it's all supposedly their beta testers just aren't very good drivers or at building setups. That's the extent to what I know. But unfortunately, there's really no way to do it perfectly, because you could have guys, again, if you're running for a team and there's some big pro race coming up and everyone's going to be using the fixed setup. You could purposely sabotage and, just give your teammate a heads up that, oh yeah, the setup's going to do this. Like, because it's so competitive, I think it's hard to find a surefire way to kind of get someone to build a setup who's, halfway decent at the game.
Yeah.
Because there'd be lots of undercutting and all that bullshit. But I do agree that it's like, no, like, you need better setups and you need to update them, when the cars are updated. That's the starting point. Where they go from there, I don't really give a shit, but they definitely need better setups.
Yeah, no kidding, because I have a great example of it, because, I mean, I was actually really stoked when Iracing updated the physics for the A car, the B car, and the C car on asphalt tracks, because, like, they were horrible. The A car was, it didn't know where it wanted to go. The B car, it was either slide or hit the wall, and C has always been, like, okay, it's never been horrific. Like, you can't really make a setup on the trucks that are bad because they just have so much downforce that it doesn't really matter. The only way that you could really fuck it up is you make it so tight entering and too loose exiting. But when they made the physics update that they said that they were working on for a long time, that, they got the speeds accurate, they got the lap times accurate, all that great nod. A lot of people had hosted sessions up for the A car at Atlanta, which is perfect. Great track to test, to screw around and see what you can do with the setups now. It drove great. Like, the track state, it seemed a lot better. You could actually run the high side around people and pass them because you're taking air off of their car. It was fantastic. But then you get the setup, it was at Auto Club when they first introduced the new setups for the new physics. Dude, it was awful. It was just like how it was before, except like you could do a couple of things. Like running around the outside of people was the only way to pass them because it would take air off of your car and make it loose, so it's not fucking tight anymore. You can pass them now. That's fun, I guess, but dude, it was such a letdown because it seemed like they were going in a great direction, and it still can be, redirected and the ship can be steered the right way. But Jesus, man, those setups can drive you fucking crazy.
Well, a lot of it too is they tend to listen to the wrong people on the forums, and what I mean by that is I'm going to tell a story here, and it's a bit of a tangent, but you'll see what I'm going at here.
Yeah.
Back in the summer of 2011, Iracing announced the new tire model, not new tire model 4 or 5 or 6, new tire model. Back then there was the old tire model, which was your sideways every corner, and then there was the new tire model. Now, the beta of the new tire model physics came with the Chevrolet Impala nationwide car. It was the first year of that car with the Car Tomorrow redesign, and they said, we're going to redesign our tires. We think David Kamer is a genius and has figured out a new way to do video game tires that makes the sim even more realistic, and we're going to just put it on this one car for a couple weeks, and we're just going to ask for some feedback. And in speaking with some of the guys I know that drive real cars, and again, one of them is my crew chief now, those were supposedly the best 3 weeks on the service. In every single nationwide series room, I think they went to Dover, Texas, and somewhere else, every top split race was won by a real driver.
Yeah.
The top 5, it was all like late model guys or Craftsman truck guys or nationwide guys winning races and just dominating people, which is how the service should be. And the guys, the sim racers, not the real drivers, but the sim racers who put the time in to understand how to save tires, understand setups, understand how a car worked, were flying by people.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, in speaking both to Chris and Dustin, they're just like, iRacing has never been that fun ever since that week, or those couple of weeks. But what happened is, all the guys who had relied on exploit setups, whether it be in the Peak series or elsewhere in prestigious iRacing leagues, you could call it,
yeah,
they went on the forums and said, what the fuck, I can't drive this. It's a plowing piece of shit. So now you have this issue where some of the demographic is saying, this is incredible and does everything my real car does, but a larger demographic is saying, I hate this, I can't drive it, fix it. Well, at that point, iRacing was getting to the point where they're getting a bit bigger. They weren't a niche service anymore. So it's like, you know what? To retain all these people paying us money who are saying it's shit, and to keep them buying content, unfortunately, we're going to have to deal, and kind of change the tire behavior to what they want. And since then, that's why people speak of new tire model 2011 September as the best, time on iRacing. They chase after some of these people who, in some cases, didn't even have their driver's license.
Yeah.
And listen to them on car physics, and, well, now we're here.
Do you feel like they did it because they didn't want to become an even more niche market? Because, like, if you have a mixture of realistic and also, like, it's attainable for me to pop in, race for a couple of weeks, and then be, half decent at it, I'll be able to, finish in the top 5. Like, do you feel like they did it for that reason alone for the future? Like, new people come in, they had never raced before, they need to be able to drive this. Like, do you feel like they did it not to become more of a niche market, I guess?
Yeah, and I was going to say the same thing. It's really just a numbers game.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say race cars are difficult to drive, but there's certain things you just need to know about them that can really fuck with someone who's not ready for it. And I think if you have that kind of experience in a video game, the average person is going to get turned off and get frustrated. So if the cars are just a little bit easier to drive more than normal, you're going to be able to retain people longer.
Yeah, that's actually something that I've gone through with not just iRacing in general, but also like sim racing as a whole. Some people don't know, but you are the guy that released the physics editor for NR 2003, like years and years ago.
Yeah.
Which has spawned like a whole little world of like people trying to make things that are relatively accurate for NASCAR Racing 2003 season, iRacing's I guess grandfather, I suppose, since iRacing is
Grandfather
so
or
different.
father or something. I guess GPL would be the grandfather because everything Papyrus has done in like a fully 3D world has been spawned off the GPL engine.
Yeah. So but that's something that a couple of people have run into where they'll make something that is relatively pretty accurate, like numbers wise, tire wise, it's pretty good. But
Yeah,
there can be one little thing that really throws people off because they just don't understand the race car. So to give you
yeah,
an example, which is not a knock because he's in the chat right now,
yeah,
it's just something that has to be explained so people can understand the situation. So, somebody that I'm working with right now, his name is Steve. He's making an DW12 EXE where it's 2014-ish Indy cars,
yeah.
where he found out a lot of stuff about the physics editor that I didn't even know about, which I'm not going to give out the details until he releases it. But I was driving around at Toronto, the road course, and the first corner and second corner, they're a double right-hander, and there's like a tiny little straightaway in the middle. When
Yeah.
you turn in for that corner, the first one, it tends to lose the front end a little bit and it'll push. That's because Indy cars have smaller front tires. Like
Yeah.
they're smaller than the rear, so the weight transfer to the left side tires from the right is substantial when the tires are smaller at the front. So it'll push a little bit. People can misconstrue that as, oh, the physics are fucking broken. It feels like a stock car in a slow corner, but it'll feel like an Indy car in a fast corner.
Yeah.
But that's just because people don't necessarily get like how IndyCar works, which is not a knock on anybody who doesn't understand it. It's just
Yeah.
it has to be explained. So when people more or less, I guess, kind of shoot away the tire model in 2011, I mean, that can happen in pretty much any sort of situation. So do you think that there could have been a way for them to have kept that tire model around if they would have been like, hey, so listen, this is how it's going to be. This is how it's a little bit more accurate because they weigh a lot. They're on rubber tires. Like, it's going to feel a little bit tighter. You're going to have more wear. It's rubber on a abrasive racetracks. Like, do you feel like they could have not weaseled their way out of it, but tried to explain, hey, this is pretty good. Like, just try to get used to it a little bit instead of just completely throwing it away after like probably maybe only 120 people were like, fuck that, I don't want to be a part of it.
I mean, it just goes back to the numbers game, right?
Yeah.
When the bigger demographic says this is shit and the car won't turn, even if these guys are 16 years old and have never even driven mom's minivan, you know, 120 of them are going to spend more money than the 10 people saying this is awesome. It's awesome. I just want to play iRacing all day.
Yeah.
And it's a shitty reality, but I mean, everyone's does it. Look at Dirt Rally with the insane amount of side force. Look at like R3 EMP cars too, where the rear tires have just a bit too much rear grip. Look at AC, where there are some tire models where I mean, you couldn't spin the tires.
Yeah.
I think a lot of devs have unfortunately had to be like, wow, people in our community suck at driving. We're gonna have to dial things back just a little bit.
Yeah.
And for most people, don't give a fuck. I mean, at the end of the day, they're not quick enough to figure out, any of the physics exploits or stuff like that. But for the people who are operating at that level where they're, a threat to win every league race, or they've got X amount of poles in a season, or shit like that. For the fast people, it's really like, what the fuck is my car doing?
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm at that point with a lot of games.
I mean, that makes sense because, obviously it works like that pretty much in any business. If you're making a chip and your chip tastes bad, but a couple of people think the chip tastes pretty good, you have to change it or people
Yeah.
won't buy it. Like, that's what I meant about it becoming so niche. Like, it kind of sucks that we don't really have like actual tire wear and iRacing, because the people that you mentioned that did that tire model, was there like actual tire wear? Like, were people having to completely, like, if you laid back for 5 laps, you could come back and just storm the people that happen to burn their shit off?
Yeah, that's how September 2011 was, and then it just was all downhill from there.
That's sad. That sucks. It's sad that we do have to like, not necessarily us, but developers, when they do find something that is actually pretty good, if the majority says, excuse me, hey, like this kind of sucks, but you're like, oh man, this is actually pretty good. Like this is how it should be. They have control over that market, and it in the end it kind of like it'll hurt the entire sim. Like if it goes down that way, it's depressing because
Well,
I wish I could have driven on it.
I mean, at the end of the day, like I find it very ironic in a sense because you have no less than 5 or 6 developer teams in the industry, going through painstaking research to get the AR mounting points correct, or the amount of downforce a rear wing produces correct. But then, when they're 95% there to a perfect simulator, or something that is reasonably close to what driving a real car feels like, they're just like, nope, it'll be too hard for people. Let's just fuck with the tires. It's just shitty, man.
Yeah, it really is like probably the worst thing a good developer can run into, where they have a great product where it's almost 1-to-1 with reality, but then you got little Timmy with his plastic wheel, and he says, "Oh, I can't drive this," and now you have to change it. Like that has to be not necessarily soul crushing, but like it has to feel like somebody punched you in the gut, because you're just like, shit, I worked so many hours on that, and now, you know, Samantha can't drive it, so now we
Yeah.
have to change it. Like that's lame. It, it's almost like a it's almost completely what sim racing should not be when that occurs, though. If you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
it kind of sucks that the market has to control sim racing, because who knows if we've never even been driving anything remotely accurate, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, there's definitely some games that are very much in the ballpark.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, before we move on to this topic, I definitely think, like, we're talking about the two things iRacing does that I feel does badly. Uh, and we went over point number one, which is the physics, and point number one was which was the marketing, and point two is the physics. I think a lot of people, like, at this point, they're probably listening to the podcast and they're just like, Austin fucking hates iRacing, and like he's just got this vendetta or whatever. But a lot of that is due to the number of just exploits in the game,
Yeah.
and I feel like those don't get enough attention. And I mean, like, I don't know, like, this is something we talked about last night or a couple nights ago in a bit of detail. But I feel like that's a very interesting rabbit hole, and part of why I feel, as we talked about earlier, the marketing doesn't really live up to what the actual product is.
Yeah. I mean, that's the rough thing with sim racing, though. You can have something that is so close, but then it just kind of gets ruined. Like I can't get over that. But like you were saying, the exploits. That's a great thing that we need to get into, because you told me something that kind of like blew my head off my shoulders. That had to revolve around iRacing camber and also like tire heat. So if you want to explain that to everybody who's watching about the camber, um, that'd be pretty great, because I think has the word gotten out about it amongst like most of the teams, or do you think this is like something that is relatively not known, I guess?
This is, from what I'm hearing, this is like a preseason testing thing. But the whole, like, a lot of people ask, well, what don't you like about iRacing's physics? You've never driven 90% of the cars, so how would you know? So let's go on a quick trip with some of the legacy exploits and then what they're doing now. So back in the day, with some of the older tire models and then old iterations of the new tire model, what people were doing to get good qualifying times at Talladega and Daytona was they were doing donuts on pit road to heat up the tires.
Yeah.
So that was exploit number one. Exploit number two is iRacing patched this exploit out by saying, okay, your tires won't gain heat under 30 miles an hour, because that's generally the speed in which you do a donut, so this solves that problem. So that created another exploit where you could idle around the track at 29 miles an hour because tire wear kicked in at 30, and then punch it in the final corner and go 3/10 to 4/10 quicker than any personal best. Of course, if you run in a league, 3/10 is pretty fucking massive.
Yeah.
That's pole by a lot. I know from the Peak series in 2013. Of course, everyone listening to this knows iRacing as like an in-game tech garage where you do your setup, and if it's illegal or it doesn't pass minimum ride height checks, game kicks you out and says no, you can't use the setup. You can't click the drive button. So what people were doing is they're building setups that were complete junk, that were way over the minimum ride height limit. So they're like jacked up like monster trucks. And they found out that you could actually go below the minimum ride height rule during the pit stop. So they just changed the right rear spring perch or spring offset during the first pit stop and go back out on the track with an illegal car and, well, win the race with an illegal setup. So what they're doing now in terms of exploits, it's first important to say that iRacing's tires don't like heat. So every time you build a setup, you're not building a setup for good tire wear. You're building a setup to have as little tire wear as possible. Now, people might say, well, you just said the same thing 2 different times. Well, it's not. When you're building a setup for good tire wear, I'm talking about you heat them up over the course of a run, and they stay heated and equal across the car until you eventually bring it into the pit stop. No tire wear and making a setup to have no tire wear means what guys are doing right now in the Peak Series and what they were doing last year, which is partly how Luza won the 2017 championship, is he would basically baby the car for an entire fuel run. Now, if you've played any stock car games before, you know the best way to drive a stock car is you're driving the car off the right rear, and especially the 1.5 milers, you're about sideways on exit. Well, this is actually bad in iRacing because any sort of tire heat slows you down. So what you do to build a setup back last year was just have a car that was neutral at like 70% attack, because when everyone burned up their shit, you would be flying, and that's just how the tire wear worked. So now we get to 2018 and what you originally asked about. Guys have found a certain combination of garage settings. It's not like a trainer or anything. It's no bullshit. Just we found this in the game, clicking around the garage menu, where it's I think something's detached in the front part of the car, or they found a combination of settings that almost gives the car active camber. And guys are reading out through their telemetry apps that like the front left has 12 degrees of camber in the corners. Now, because there's no sidewall flex when you have 12 degrees of camber, because the whole contact patch is touching the track, you're actually getting more or less tire wear, and the tires are lasting longer running fucking 12 degrees of camber on an oval car.
That's outrageous. I mean, what do you think the possibility of the devs knowing about that is? Because like that should be a serious red flag. Like that should, if I were them, I would almost like not necessarily shut the sim down for a bit, but like I would really put all my effort into trying to figure out how the fuck can we get rid of that, because that should not even happen. If you did that, you would blow a tire in like a lap. Like that's not right. So
maybe not a lap, but I mean, people would point at you and be like, "What the fuck are you leaving pit road with that thing for?"
Yeah.
But I think the devs don't know about it, because you have to realize a lot of these guys in the Peak series, and we could extend that to the over the pond for the World Grand Prix series. A lot of these guys are so passionate about winning and competing for that championship. I mean, like it's not like they win a lot of money. I think it's like $6,000 after American taxes kick in.
Yeah.
But like that's still a good, that's a good chunk of change for people who are just doing this as a hobby. So I think a lot of guys are just reluctant to report it because their competitive advantage will be taken away. And that's kind of a weird situation, because you have this really high grade simulator that's advertised as the best in the world, but the competitive element has made it so people intentionally aren't reporting exploits that really mess up the authenticity of the simulator because they want a chance at $6,000.
Yeah.
Like it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, you know what? Like, honestly, if I were in that situation, I feel like I would be the better person and be like, hey, iRacing, there's something wrong here. But then again, if you're talking about $6,000, I'm thinking about pizzas coming to my front door. Like, yeah. I got an extra $6,000. I can go fuck around and do some shit for a bit.
Yeah.
So, like, you can feel like you would be the nice guy and be like, hey, this is broken. But like you said, you get a little bit of dough out of it. You can buy like a new computer and be a happy guy. Like,
Oh yeah.
Pay off half of your car or whatever the fuck you need to do. But do you think there would ever be a possibility that they would ever look into it, even if they did find out, or do you think that they almost have to leave it that way now, since more than likely a lot of people are doing it at this point?
iRacing is, in general, I found, is pretty good at squashing problems. They're a bit late on things,
Yeah,
but that happens. That's gaming.
yeah,
But in general, when someone brings something to their attention, they usually make a good effort to go and fix it. I mean, if you look at all the disconnection issues that plague a lot of the World Tour events, like, I mean, yeah, there are still, maybe it's a bad example, but yeah, there are still races that go off with a bunch of disconnects. But it's not like they don't try. It's not like they don't actively go out and work and try and fix it. They're just late on it.
yeah,
And I mean, we saw the same thing with the dynamic track glitch, where people could join the session at a certain time and receive different weather conditions and just smoke everyone in the race.
yeah,
It took them a while to respond to that. It really did. It took, when I covered the story, it was like 2 or 3 weeks between someone on the Skip Barber forums reported it and it got fixed. But like, I mean, they definitely do try and fix it. My thing is really how these kind of issues really mess with the marketing side of things, which is what we talked about earlier, right? So you have, the marketing department saying, again, the basically the best sim in the world. Let's paraphrase here. But then you get into the sim and you're like, yeah, we're running 12 degrees of camber on the oval cars.
yeah,
And then like, for me, like, because I follow a lot of stock car drivers on Twitter. You see these posts like, yeah, like, I spent some time on iRacing today, the best simulator ever, and you should you should take a few laps. And then I jump on TeamSpeak and hit up my buddy, and he's like, yeah, we found this thing that is like screwing with our setups.
yeah. It must be pretty weird. Like, I couldn't even imagine if I found out something like that, like, what my reaction would be, because it would just be like, I feel like it would be shock and a little bit of like, dude, come on. Like, do you feel like because of all these changes that they've made in the past, like 2011 when they had the good tire model,
Yeah.
then people screamed and yelled and said, I don't like that. Do you think if they would have, fought back a little bit, that some of these issues would have never happened? Like, do you think at some point that if iRacing does introduce another tire model that not necessarily is completely the same, but relatively similar, do you think that they should put their foot down and be like, hey man, like, this is how it's going to be. Like, we have to have it like this, or we're going to have even more exploits that could be more ridiculous?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, with some of the studies I've done on the sim community, just by crunching numbers, it's something like 85% of the people in these games can't drive. So why are you trying to appeal to them anyway?
Yeah.
Why not just make it how it is and make it something that you're satisfied with internally, and just people like it, they like it, and if people don't, well, they're shit.
Yeah. Because, I mean, like, isn't it shouldn't it be if you join a game and you're not good at it, but you want to get good at it, that you have to try, instead of it just being like, hey, I can just jump right in. I don't have to really put a ton of effort into it. I just got to figure out these little tidbits, and then I'll be able to just, be as good as everybody else in like a month or two. Like, I feel like it should be difficult when you join, instead of it being like, oh, okay, I can see a future here. I guess, if that makes sense, like, it should be, a challenge, I guess, is what
I
I'm trying to
definitely
get at.
agree with you, because I mean, racing sims as a whole, and even when we're not talking about iRacing, the whole idea of sim racing is that you're supposed to just have fun in getting better and understanding the car setup,
Yeah.
and understanding how to drive better. So I don't really understand what we're trying to accomplish by making, or I guess accommodating is the better word, accommodating some of the lesser skilled drivers in the community, because, well, that's the whole draw of the game, is just getting better.
Yeah.
So why would you make the minimum skill required lower? Why not just have it where it should be? And if people aren't good, they aren't good.
Yeah, you know what? That's funny, because specifically myself, like, when we're not talking about sim racing, I can use a good example, because obviously it's one of the most popular games in the world right now. But PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, right?
Yeah.
FPS shooter, it's really difficult. Like, you have to know your shit, you have to be good at aiming, you also have to be really good at making a strategy that can work at the end of the game to win. But when you drop in amongst a lot of people, your chances of dying go extremely high based off of circumstances. But if you get good at it, you can waste people, and it's super fun. But if if they made it to where newer players had like some sort of fucking aimbot, like how Call of Duty used to have, like if you're playing the campaign, you can
Yeah.
immediately latch onto somebody's head and shoot them. That's not fucking fun. So, but like, do you feel like people would be less inclined to show up if they were immediately like, if they changed their moniker from best sim to most hardcore, like you have to know what the fuck you're doing to be relatively good at this? Like, do you think that they would lose subscriptions and people buying new cars and tracks and such?
No, and that's something I don't really understand, right? Like everyone sort of understands that like PC sims are for the hardcore guys, and there's still a whole world of console games you can play if that's not up your alley. Like you can go and play NASCAR, Heat, or Gran Turismo, and you're gonna have fun,
Yeah,
right? So I don't really understand the whole push from it's really almost industry wide to make things a little bit simpler.
yeah.
Not like baby tier. I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but I don't really understand the idea to pander. Maybe it's unfortunately, and I hate to kind of segue into this topic, but maybe it's to try and latch onto the esports crowd
Yeah.
just a tad. But the whole esports push and the idea that if you do good in the sim, we'll get you a real race car. In my opinion, that's a false lead.
Yeah, it should be, right? Because, like, I mean, if you were a peak champion and you get $6,000 at the end of it, or if you're a world champion on the road course side and you get money, regardless of whatever it is, you have a little bit of money, you could possibly go out and put a little bit, put a little of it away. Maybe you win next season. Now you got 12,000. You can go and cut your teeth on some other track. Now you
Yeah.
can buy a car and you can do all that great shit. But like the fact that they are pushing for esports, especially for sim racing, is kind of fucking odd. Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because if the sim isn't even like majoritively correct, like if the majority of it is like a little bit missed, especially with the tires, if you can crank the camber up to 12 and that's how you usually race, how the fuck are you going to transfer into real life and do well, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, and this brings up a topic I really wanted to go into, which is and this isn't an iRacing thing. This is a genre slash industry wide thing.
Yeah.
The very strange push as of late to say if you play video games, you can jump into a real race car and do just fine. And as someone who has done this firsthand, I'm just completely embarrassed to see some of these pushes because you really can't.
How so? Like, is it almost completely different, or can you take some things from a sim and actually do well in reality?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it at the end there. What triggers me the most about these kind of marketing, I don't want to call them stunts, but this kind of theme that's cropped up of late is basically in the way it's worded. If you went straight from a video game to any sort of, I guess, from what I have experience in amateur oval cars, it's very, I would call it very, very dangerous. The reason for this is because almost every sim across the market, like we've touched on, has physics exploits that you learn to drive around.
Yeah.
And to get off the kind of iRacing train here, because people are probably listening and going, "Fuck, why won't this guy shut up?" No, let's go closer to home. Project Cars 2, which is a game I've helped test, is in my opinion, there's a bit too much rear grip. Now, if you were to take someone, let's say, just some random average Joe who's, he's got a driver's license, but he's never driven a race car before, and you told him to just practice on the SCCA Mustang in that game, and just run a bunch of laps and get good at it, and set a world record or two, just so we know you're properly quick, and toss him in my late model, which is roughly the same car, maybe a bit less horsepower, slightly different tires, but whatever. It's more or less the same thing.
Yeah.
That would be quite terrifying because in Project Cars 2, he's learned to just mat the throttle on corner exit and just steer out of it. Well, in our car, you can't do that. So that would lead to someone spinning out on lap 2 or 3.
Yeah, and then possibly like destroying the car. Like
Yeah.
that I do see what you're saying. That is it's almost, it's not only disingenuous, it's seriously dangerous when you talk about it in that way.
Yeah.
Cuz like you don't know what, anything can happen in a car. You can get your neck broken and you'll be fucked for life
Yeah.
if you tried to do some of the things that you're able to do inside of a game. But like so we did talk about the negative of that. If there is any positives that you can find out of it, what would they entail? Like, is it a little bit easier to transition to real life with your hands, with the wheel, or with your feet, with the throttle? Like, is there any positives to doing gaming for, racing race cars and then going into a real car?
Absolutely. Driving in a pack is the same thing because it's just people driving cars. It doesn't matter if it's a game or reality. Braking is roughly the same in real life as it is in the game. So the trail braking technique,
Yeah.
Just everything you do braking wise is roughly the same. I want to say line selection is more or less the same. It's just these little quirks that each of these games has that if you practice on one, for example, and I've seen, like let's take Gran Turismo for example. Let's say you go from Gran Turismo to real life with no training. You're thrown in a car. GT is just so simple compared to how a real car drives. You wouldn't be prepared for the chronic understeer.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be prepared for how you can't rapid fire downshift. Like if you, for example, you get into a GT3 car. Let's say you do the fucking Mercedes AMG experience. You can't rapid fire downshift like you can in GT.
Yeah, you would blow the engine.
And even from my personal experience, when I first started driving and did like the school promo at my local track, one of the bad habits I picked up from R Factor I had to unlearn, which was R Factor has a thing where you can rock the gas and the brake in the corners at the same time, and you can run a super loose race car and just modulate that looseness with the brakes. A lot of guys call it the 2-foot magic save hacks.
Yeah.
So for years upon years in R Factor, I had been driving and taking these really difficult corners, pressing both the gas and the brake because it was fast. So I get in a real car and I got the instructor on the radio, and he's like, "Why are you like on both the gas and the brake and corner entry?" And I'm just like, "Oh shit," and I feel like when you have these guys like Dale Jr. tweeting about, "Oh yeah, you can just get discovered on a sim and then just jump in a real car." Like, no, like there's shit if you don't teach, like they'll fucking hit a wall.
Yeah.
And with so many of these games having so many of these little exploits, and I could talk for days about that shit, right?
Yeah.
These little things you do to go fast in a game that's not entirely realistic. That's such an important part of the transitioning process. I'm almost disgusted that no one talks about it.
Yeah, like we mentioned before, that shit is dangerous. Like we're talking about getting behind, race cars that are thousands of pounds, and you're hitting fucking. It can be an Armco barrier. It can be thousands of fucking concrete walls everywhere. You don't know what's gonna happen, so you can get really fucked up if you tried to do, whatever you've been learning in sim racing. That when you go into a real car, that's just not gonna work. Like. That did used to bother me though. When I did see the prolific almost interview that Dale Jr. had, that was, I think it might have been on ESPN talking about iRacing like years ago, like in 2010-ish. It was some interview. There
was one he did in like his shop, and then there's another they did with him and Truex. But if it's the one in his shop, I definitely agree. Like I don't disagree that pro drivers should be going out and being like, yeah, like if you're proficient in a simulator, you can jump in a real car and be okay. I don't disagree with the premise of what they're doing, but they're leaving out that really important middle step that no, like someone has to sit you down and be like, straight up, this part of the game is broken and doesn't work like real life, and you have to know this before getting in a car.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind that no one talks about this.
Yeah, because like how you explain with the GT3 car with rapid downshifts. I mean, dude, you would either break a transmission, or you would blow an engine. Like it's disingenuous because they won't just come out and be like, so listen, we had to make compromises. You have to understand that if we would have kept it completely realistic, you probably would have taken a really long time to get used to this, number one, and number two, get good at it. So
Yeah.
like, but like you were saying, like with you hitting the brake and hitting the gas at the same time in the corners to make sure that you weren't, gonna wreck it.
Yeah.
Good thing you had somebody say, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing, man? Like
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. You're kind of this is counterintuitive. Like you're not doing
Yeah.
anything interesting here. It's not gonna work." That is something that they should do, though. How you were explaining, they need to come out and be like, "Hey, man, so some of this shit does not work this way. Like you can't just
Yeah.
immediately dive right in and expect, okay, this is how this works." Like I do agree with you. That's a little bit gross. Is a
Like
good word.
especially with our late model season this year, because I've run a lot of NASCAR 03 to practice. I've run a lot of BeamNG to practice, and I unfortunately I did boot up Iracing once in a while to check what their late model did.
Yeah.
And I mean, straight up, the entire 2016 to 2017 off season, there was like 2 months straight where me and Dustin would get on our own private NASCAR 03 server, and we'd run like 200 laps at some short track. I think we ran a lot at Dells. We ran a bunch at Vernon, and there was some other short track we did. But every night he'd be like, "Okay, you can do this in NASCAR 03, but it doesn't work in real life, so don't do it in a real car."
Yeah.
And there was just like countless lesson after lesson after lesson after lesson. It was great, because when I finally got in the car, my first heat race ever, I set the quickest lap time.
Yeah.
But I feel like people leaving that out is doing a disservice basically to the whole hobby,
Yeah.
because you're giving, you're basically being dishonest about the whole thing.
Yeah.
You cannot go straight from sim to reality. You need a teacher who can sit down and be like, "This game's busted." And
Yeah.
it's also giving, to segue into our next topic, it's giving a lot of people who maybe are a bit vulnerable these really false hopes and almost delusions of grandeur in terms of what sim racing can do for them. I wake up one day and I'm seeing people building 25 grand sim cockpits, and I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like,
Yeah.
shit.
I mean, the other night when we did have, like, you came on because you were watching the stream and you wanted to say hi, and I was like, oh, this is a great idea. I haven't gotten
Yeah.
to actually talk to you. We were just talking in Reddit messages. So I was like, okay, great. Let's bring him in here. And then you started dropping some serious heat, and I was like, holy shit. But, like, oh, Jesus, I lost my train of thought. No, you came in and you were talking about how, the differences between real life and sim were really blurred. And it made a lot of... It sparked some shit in my brain that I did kind of want to ask you, because, yeah, like, you have the Jason Jacobys of the world that are out here. They could easily have spent their money in the right way and actually been on the track and actually learned some shit, but instead they wanted to put their money into a sim that has significant what's the word, imbalances towards real life.
Yeah, or shortcomings, or stuff that is kind of dangerous to teach people.
Yeah, I mean, that's wild. And not only that, he almost more or less, like, his life is pretty much fucked over unless something wild happens and he can pay away that debt. Like, he's gonna be in some trouble now. So, like, but when you were showing me some of the videos that he did, where he was, like, having his friends try the cockpit out, you can look at their faces in the video and they're like, what the fuck? Like, why'd you do this?
Well, and that kind of leads to why I was saying, when it comes to the drivers marketing these simulators, is you can go straight from sim to reality and be super successful. That's why I think a bit more honesty is needed, so you don't have people like this, because it's really not just Jason who's been like that. You can even look in the Peak series, some guys who are printing out hero cards and stuff like that, and doing basically what I would consider cringeworthy stuff.
Yeah.
To try and promote sim racing as this like virtual proving ground, and it's just, man, like, there needs to be kind of a shift in the paradigm, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm waking up and we're at that point when all the Jacoby stuff was going around, we were buying parts for a real car, and me and Dustin are sitting on TeamSpeak and we're calculating how much that sim rig costs, and we're like, yo, there's people in this hobby that are spending more on video games than we're spending on a real car this year. Why? What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, it's. Do you. Here's a good question. Do you feel like that? I mean, obviously, it is his fault because he paid for the shit. Nobody put a gun to his head and say, "Hey, waste your fucking money on a sim rig like this and
Yeah,
use actual parts that you could have used for a real car, so you could have actually went out on a real track and driven."
yeah.
Nobody forced him to do that, but do you almost hold, not necessarily sim racing as a whole, but do you hold them accountable for trying to put this shit in people's heads that, like, if I do this somehow it'll make me better, like
Yeah,
it'll give me a better experience, I guess.
absolutely. I mean, I see, especially with NASCAR and NBC and NASCAR and Fox as of late, really pushing the iRacing angle. I'm not shitting on iRacing in this particular segment,
Yeah.
but I see, like I said, I see Michael Waltrip during pre-race shows talking about, oh, William Byron got to start on sim racing, and Dale, Dale Jr., more or less shilling for games. Kyle Larson, I'm just going to drop names here. Larson, uh, that sort of thing. I see them really pushing this narrative that sim racing is such a good practice tool, but like we mentioned a couple minutes ago, they're forgetting that integral middle step,
Yeah.
and they're also not making it clear the other side of the story, which is the money aspect.
Yeah.
I mean, to get in a car, like, yeah, sim racing can help you, but I mean, straight up, like, cars cost money. You're not just going to get a seat for free because you're good at sim racing. You need, you need to be a paid driver. Straight up. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I did. I didn't think it was beneath me. I just said, you know what, I can use this stuff to practice, but I'm gonna have to fork over the money someday, and I did.
Yeah, you know
And
what? That's super interesting. Because you were mentioning those names for Fox. I mean, who's been a bigger proponent of iRacing on, or well, sim racing in general, but also iRacing because it's the keynote for NASCAR supposedly.
yeah,
Like Parker Kligerman on NBC. There's been nobody else who has done more iRacing anything on TV than him. Like I remember specifically Talladega last fall. He was showing off like how the drafting worked in iRacing, and I was
yeah,
like, dude, you cannot show that because like it's okay, I'm sure that like it's not that far off, but I mean when we're talking about like the side draft and how the draft, like the inertia actually kind of like fucks with you when you're like the closing rate is so quick on the car in front of you. Like in
yeah.
iRacing, you barely have to let off the gas. Like, no, dude, the momentum in real life, it has to be a lot different. Like, it was so disingenuous, and it's not like he's the one pushing that narrative, but it's just it's scary because like there's no way that shit's accurate. Talk to real NASCAR drivers; they talk about it all the time that shit ain't right, and then they're using it on television. And it's like I understand that you're trying to explain to people that this is okay, but there's no way that you can use this and be like, this is what's gonna happen on the track. Like, dude, don't do that. It's weird.
What I would like from these kind of bigger names that are promoting sim racing, doesn't matter what game. What
Yeah,
I'd like in the future is for them to just be more thorough about what sim racing can do for someone who's looking to get into the world of racing.
yeah,
Because right now the current thing is you can go from sim racing to real racing and you'll be good. And that, again, that's putting a lot of things into the heads of the Jacobys of the world, that okay, you can just sit around and ask for a ride. I think what they need to do going forward is they need to say you can actually practice a lot of good racing skills on sim racing, and if you want to get into racing, here's how you can do it. And then they can say, go run Hornets, go run Chump Car, go run Lemons, go run Autograss in the UK, like something very easy and cheap,
yeah,
and then explain to people how to do it. I think that would be a much better way to promote what sim racing can do for a rookie driver. And then, of course, when you bundle that with drivers being a little more open and saying, it's not just about being good at Gran Turismo and then getting a seat from Nissan. It's about understanding what the sim does wrong and then preparing yourself for the differences. I think that'd be great. I don't really have a problem, per se, in how they're aggressively promoting sim racing on modern racing broadcasts right now.
Yeah.
I just think that they're not telling enough of the whole story.
Yeah, I agree because like I mean, I had my problem with the Parker Kligerman presentation of iRacing because it was just like it
Yeah.
doesn't even if it doesn't even look the same at all, then I don't even think it'll drive the same. The side draft is completely wrong. That kind of shit bothers me. But like the fact that they're showing it on television, it does kind of like I don't think they're necessarily being dishonest when they're doing it. They're just being like, hey, if you want to be able to like drive on these tracks and understand like what it might be like, then that's great. Like they should be doing more of that with a lot of other simulators, like Blancpain using Assetto Corsa. That'd be fantastic or whatever. But like when they're going out of their way, pretty much being like, this is an actual representation. It's like, dude, don't lie to people. Like, why are you lying? It's gross.
I mean, like, to the average user, it doesn't matter, but then you have the people like myself who know behind the scenes that, again, guys are running 12 degrees of camber. Yeah. It's just like, come on, man.
Yeah, it's gross. That shit, that still boggles my mind. I can't believe it. But, like, I do like what you said, though, when you were saying, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be bad for them to keep promoting these, I wouldn't, the way that they describe it as tools, but it's like it can be and it can't be. If you're going from sim racing right to the car, dude, you're gonna fuck up. You're probably gonna wreck. Like it could happen. But like I watched Cale Gale. He used to be a truck series driver. He won at Homestead in 2011 for their finale race. He was practicing for Martinsville last season on iRacing, and he was like, he did a really good job because he wasn't like, oh, iRacing's the fucking best, man. Like, this is fantastic. He was like, I'm using this so I can figure out, like, where I need to brake, what signs I can look for braking, and just overall, like, how I can try to pass people in the car. Like, he wasn't trying to be, you know, like, this is absolutely perfect. I hate that shit. Like, a great example would be if you look up, I think it was an interview with a radio announcer for Denny Hamlin. They had iRacing in their studio with like a G27, and they were like, how do you feel about this? And when he's driving in the game, the wheel isn't even matching like the input in the game, so he's like turning over like 80, 90 degrees, and he was like, oh, you know, this is pretty good. I use this to practice. And I was like, dude, how can you say that? Like, he should have been like, dude, this wheel's completely off. Y'all don't even have this shit right. Let me try to help you a little bit or something. But he didn't do that. He was just immediately like, oh, yeah, I use it to test sometimes, which he does. He said he used NR 2003 to win at Pocono in 2006 both times. So, like, you know, that kind of shit is important. But then again, he went right into that studio, watched how fucked up it was, and he wasn't like, dude, this is fucked. Like, it was weird. It is really disingenuous how sometimes they twist the narrative to make it look a lot more realistic than it is.
So we're, let's see, an hour and a half into this podcast. We've covered why PRC was open. We've covered why PRC closed. We've covered some of the iRacing exploits, some of the stuff behind the scenes. We've covered sim to reality stuff and what could be done to make it better. What else is on the plate tonight?
So your racing career is actually pretty interesting because I want to know how that started, because you did say that you met your crew chief on iRacing, and I want to know how that happened to blossom into you being able to get into a real car and actually, you know, compete, because I want to just know, like, you any good, dude?
We worked together in 2013, and I remember we'd come home from work every day, and we were living in Grand Prairie at the time. Grand Prairie is a fucking shithole. I know, like, that word has some like really bad connotation because of something Trump supposedly said, but no, but like Grand Prairie is one of the most dangerous cities in Canada, and we were working there in for construction for about a month or so. And I brought my computer up there, and we would just hot lap NASCAR 03 afterward because there's nothing to do up there.
Yeah.
And they actually had one of the tracks he raced at in back when it was still open, which is a Motoplex Speedway in Vernon. So someone made that for NASCAR 03, and we just hot lapped all day. And he's like, "Yo, like these truck physics are pretty good," and I just happened to beat him by like half a tenth one day. Like it was close. Like this was some good hot seat multiplayer gameplay shit. So we start talking. We're sitting around the fire one night, and he's like, one of these days, like we should see if we can get like a car going. And he's like, you're really not bad at this, and like you don't drive, with a lot of exploits in NASCAR 03, and like you might be kind of okay at oval racing. Yeah. And like it was kind of like, I don't want to say it was lip service, but we just basically sat around the fire, being like, wouldn't it be cool one day if like we just like ran a stock car together?
Yeah.
So a couple of years later, it's like 2015, and I was like 22 or 23 years old, and I just had a bunch of money saved up. I was working full time. The job wasn't paying the greatest, but I don't have an addiction or a drinking problem, so that money just kind of pooled, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, there's no girl in the picture. I'm doing okay. Let's spoil myself. So I said fuck it, and then we got a local track about an hour south in Wetaskiwin, and they had one of those stock car schools, and like these are the kind of things where it's like you can either buy the shitty $100 one, or like a 10-lap deal that you buy like your parents for their birthday or some shit because dad's always wanted to drive a stock car, or you pay like $700, which is a lot of money, and you basically get coached by like an actual driver on the property. And I said, fuck it, like let's figure out if I'm okay at this racing thing. And we went out and we tested. I just tested like a fucking street stock. It wasn't anything exciting.
Yeah.
And everyone on the property is just like, you're really not bad at this. Like you look pretty good out there. Aside from like the first stint I was trying to fucking 2-foot magic save hacks like it was R Factor. But then brake and gas don't go on at the same time. You get taught that, and it's like, okay, whatever. And then so basically I got my NASCAR license. It's just $100 you apply for it. And by chance, there's a guy up here in Edmonton on the north side that opened a sim cafe. So we just had like 10 cockpits set up with R Factor 2 going. And I was like, you know what? If I just hang around here, I bet you I'm going to run into someone that races out in Wetaskiwin. And I'll just be like, you know what? I've got money. Like, what can I drive? And at that point, I wasn't like some of these guys on Iracing or similar services where they're like, I'm gonna win this online championship and then hold out for a late model. I was like, no. And I basically ran into a guy named Justin who'd won the Hornet championship. And I said, hey, like I've got the license, I did the school, I'm pretty good at sim racing. I'd like to try this for real. Can you build me a car? And he was fucking blown away because there's this random motherfucker who's like, straight up, I'll give you, $1,200 to build me a Hornet and I'll run as your teammate. Because, with Edmonton's economy being kind of shit, like, A, who the fuck has money, and B, like, oh, this guy doesn't want to pay for a car on a payment plan, like he's actually wanting to follow through with this.
Yeah.
So I basically just started racing Hornets locally. I didn't feel like it was beneath me, which is, again, what a lot of people has kept a lot of people out of amateur racing. They don't want to run. They want to jump in the cool cars right away.
Yeah.
They don't want to pay for it. They just want to win a championship on, their sim of choice and then be handed a 500 horsepower car. So I said no and, started at the very bottom. And I want to say 2 or 3 months in, I was the points leader.
That's pretty neat. That's actually like a great little story because that is really true that people will just kind of like sit out and wait for a big opportunity, which, usually does not come. Like that doesn't really happen because, real life drivers that aren't really super biased, they'll know pretty quick. Like that's probably not right. Like,
yeah.
And team owners don't want to take that chance because that's just goofy. That's stupid.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any business sense. So it is pretty interesting that you were just like, fuck that. I'm just going to go and drive Hornets because that's actually a really cheap way to start racing. And you can actually learn like quite a bit from Hornet racing, from what I've heard from other people who have started out doing that.
Well, I mean, the whole season was, and I think I calculated it one day because I was bored, It's only like 1,900 Canadian, which is 1,500 US.
Yeah.
Not bad. I
That's
mean, if
really
you have a
good.
job and you don't have any sort of addictions or vices, then that's like 2 paychecks the whole
Yeah.
season, easy. You
That's
know,
pretty neat.
and I just drove my ass off. That's at the end of the day, and I made because sim racing had taught me so much about being aggressive in a pack, and like I said, there are some good things it teaches. You know, when you're the points leader at the midway point of the season, people are like, "Who the fuck is this guy?"
Yeah.
And of course, I'd always stayed in touch with Dustin, so I'm getting basically setup advice from him, and he's walking me through. We're going on TeamSpeak after each race, and we're looking at my driving because I started recording my onboards just for something to do.
Yeah.
And I basically had someone coaching me throughout the season, being like, okay, in Sims this works, in real life it doesn't, so in real life do this, and that's just how I kept finishing well. And I mean, I blew a couple motors during the year,
Yeah.
but that at the end of the day, it's a fucking Chevy Cavalier. Like they're not meant to do what we were doing with them, right?
Yeah. I mean,
And then, I
oh,
mean, a lot
sorry.
of people want to know. A lot of people want to know how the SMS sponsorship came to be, and it
Yeah.
was really just Ian and I were talking through emails, and I just pitched it to him one day, just almost as a joke, but not really, and he went for it. That's all there was.
Yeah, that's a lot of people try to like I know somebody specifically, I'm not going to mention names because they're doing what they got to do.
Yeah,
But they'll send emails to these big like corporation type deals,
yeah,
and they have this whole like nice little PDF layout
yeah,
being like, I need this much, I need this much, this is what I'll
yeah,
do. Hopefully I do really good. I want to make sure that your investment goes somewhere. And that
yeah,
comes from the heart and everything, but like sometimes it doesn't really work out to do it like that. Like you need to start somewhere small, get just like a regular resume, like
yep,
for any old job. Like if you want to go work a desk somewhere, you kind of probably need to know how to, you know, do that service, whatever the fuck you're trying to get into. So, I mean, but hearing your story, it's actually really nice because like it wasn't some fucking, you know, I'm waiting around hoping and praying. And no, you put your own money in. And we're like, fuck it, let's just do this shit, and you did
well,
well.
that's why I was really disappointed in particularly in Jacoby's instance when he started going on with his sim rig and doing the thing with basically using it as, well, I'm good at sim racing, so I'm going to get a real ride.
Yeah,
That's why I was really disappointed in seeing that, and that's why I wrote the articles that I did on PRC. Right, is because I knew I essentially had done what he's trying to do,
yeah,
and I could prove that it worked, and I could say, here are the 12 steps to follow exactly what I did, and be in some sort of race car that's really quick in a couple of years.
yeah,
And I had, like, I hate using the 12-step analogy because that's something reserved for like AA, but I really knew the exact path to take, and it's why I preach like the Hornander street stock route, right?
yeah,
And I was just disappointed to see someone, from the same community I was in, from basically the same background I was in, where he's just single guy at 25 with a bunch of money, right? Or in that case, wasn't a bunch of money, but whatever, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Who could make a choice to spend some money and go racing, and I knew how to do it, and I could show him, and I could be like, these are the 12 steps. This is what you got to do. You do this. You buy this safety equipment. You get this, this, and this. You run at this track and this track. You meet with this person, and you got a car for a year. Awesome.
yeah.
And within 2 years, look where I ended up, and within 2 years, look where he ended up, and it was just really, really disappointing.
Yeah, and it's like I was telling you about that the last time we kind of did this, where it just popped out of nowhere. But this time we actually had a plan.
Yeah.
But when we were talking about him, I was basically saying like, people feel sorry for him, which like in my case, I don't necessarily, because it's, it was his choice to do what he did, but he could easily rectify that. Like he's got that
Yeah.
chassis. Just go spend the extra money that you basically don't have and then actually go race and see what the fuck you can do.
Yeah.
But my actual point here was like, when we were talking about it, I was like, where did he go wrong? Like, why didn't somebody step in and be like, hey, do you realize why this doesn't make any sense? Like, you're doing shit that physically doesn't make any sense, and then also you're just making a bad decision. Like, but not to get on Jason Jacoby, but like
Yeah,
that's like how you were saying, you don't want it to sound like an AA meeting, but the 12
yeah.
steps, like he just went wrong at like number 5. Like, what the fuck are you
Yeah.
doing, man?
Well, and I think it's partly not his fault because of what we talked about earlier, right?
Yeah,
When you have a lot of this marketing not actually outlining the exact steps to go from sim racing to reality, and you just have these little 140 or 280 character tweets from pro drivers saying if you play X simulator, you'll be in a real car. A lot gets lost in translation, and you have guys who maybe they aren't smart enough to be like, oh, there might be more to this, right?
yeah.
I just think that's what's happened there, and I don't think he'll be the last person.
No,
I
I
really
don't
don't.
either.
I really don't.
I mean, it's almost a miscarriage of justice when that kind of shit happens, because you, like how you were saying, you're somebody who has more or less did what he did, but at like a much smaller scale, and
Yeah,
it ended up working out really well. Like you did
yeah.
great, and then, but
And it,
for
and
him,
it wasn't like a fluke, right? Like I know every decision I made since I went to the licensing thing,
yeah,
and I know how someone else could basically repeat that exact same path to go from sim racing to reality and actually enjoy themselves and have a lot of fun and not have to spend a lot of money.
yeah,
And I feel like I feel a bit insulted that like, hey, someone's actually doing this in the community and they've proven it works, and you're just going off and not doing that.
yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Like, either they're not intelligent to see the picture that you painted, or they just like, I can see why you're insulted, because it's like, dude, this could easily work for you, but you didn't fucking do it. Like, why didn't you actually go for it instead of staying in something that seemed a little comforting because that marketing was the way that it is? Like, it's kind of maddening in a way.
Well, I think part of it has to do with some of the community, and I mean, I hate shitting on the sim community when it's not warranted,
Yeah,
because there are definitely some good people in this community. I mean, a lot of my closest online friends I consider on par with my real friends just because they're great people,
yeah,
right? But I feel like in the sim community, a lot of people, not all of them, but a lot of them, feel like sim racing is somehow superior to getting a real ride because you can drive anything anywhere. You know, like for me, I get to drive, you know, like let's say this year, 9 times a year
hmm,
at very specific tracks in British Columbia and possibly Washington. Or if I want to, I can run my local track. Whereas if you're in a sim, you pay the couple $1,000s to build a nice rig, but man, you can go back to the fucking 50s if you want and, you know, run tracks that don't exist anymore.
yeah.
And I think that mentality has kind of almost taken over the quest to get in a real car of some sorts, which is really fucking bizarre. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like, I love playing Madden or NHL despite all their flaws, but, like, it'd be pretty cool to play in the NHL, and, like, that should be the primary goal, you know?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, like, it would be great if people would actually think with their head and be like, okay, so I could spend, like you said, you only ended up spending like 1,500
Yeah.
to run a full season of something that, you can actually learn a lot from. Like, but then they would rather, spend almost $4,000, $5,000,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, you can go drive uh Skip Barber at, fucking Watkins Glen, or you could go and drive an Indy car at, fucking wherever. Like,
Yeah.
that's a cute idea and everything, but like, you're not actually, it's like a disconnect. Like, you're not actually in this car, you're not actually at this track. Like, why does this appeal more to you than actually going out and getting in a suit, putting on your helmet, having your gloves on a wheel and your feet on the pedals, and physically doing something that is real? Like, what the fuck is going on?
Well, like,
And
especially, I get really perplexed with that too, because when I think of all the memories I've made in 2 years of racing,
yeah,
and I compare that to just basically sitting in my undies playing fucking, you know, whatever sim till 2 or 3 a.m., man, like, I'd really take racing, you know, 10 times out of 10
yeah,
instead of sim driving. Not that sim driving isn't fun, but I mean, every trip to the track or every trip out of the province to go run somewhere else is a fucking adventure.
Yeah.
And I mean that in every sense of the word. And you just don't get that in sim racing.
Yeah.
And I mean, like some of the stories I have are just epic. You know.
Do you have one as a good example, like your most fun adventure?
Oh God. I'd have to do like a top five just out of order. But like fuck, man. I guess let's start off. Basically, the way Alberta's laid out and the way Wetaskiwin's track is located compared to all the different municipalities.
Yeah.
Basically, I live in Edmonton. I drive 30 minutes south to Leduc. I pick up my buddy Dan to go to the track because he raced Hornets with me. And then we drive another 30 minutes south to Wetaskiwin. So basically, what would happen is when everyone would drive back to Edmonton, because everyone lives in Edmonton when they race out there,
Yeah.
there would be about 5 or 6 of us cramming into Dan's house at like 1 a.m. after the race, all watching the GoPro footage. And just like everyone's smoking a bit of weed and getting drunk and shit. And like, it's awesome.
Yeah.
And like, that stuff you don't get in sim racing. You know, when all of your buddies are just crammed on, Dan's 2 little sofas and are just like, rewinding and watching like the same, crash or crazy pass over and over and over again. Like, that's just so fucking cool, man. Or like, you come home and it was fucking, plus 12 outside and it's cold as shit. And, Dan's wife made us cookies after racing. You're just like, man, fuck yeah, cookies, right?
Yeah.
But you don't get that in sim racing.
Yeah. You know what? That's actually a lot like how, I mean, it's a weird example, but it is true. There's a lot of like pro wrestlers, right? The
Yeah.
WWE type guys where they're like, dude, I had way more fun on the indie circuits where I was like, crammed in a bus with like 7 other people.
Yeah.
And then we're like pissing in a community pot at the end of a fucking show, just being like, that was actually really entertaining and barely getting paid and all that shit.
Yeah.
They say that they would take that back over being a part of something that was, a lot larger because like the people weren't necessarily there anymore. Like
Yeah.
meeting new people must be like the most fun, like being able to know new people and building friendships alongside doing something that you love to do. Like that has to
Yeah.
be pretty incredible.
Like every day, like racing Hornets, and I'll get on into late models in a bit, but like when you race Hornets, for us, there was about a group of 10 guys who just showed up every week, and we were very lucky. We had a very good Hornet class for a few years. It's not the greatest this year, but that's, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was just sweet to have this, core group of guys to run with every week for points. And then someone new would come out, and we'd all, kind of run over to their trailer and look at their new car. And, oh, you built a Neon? We haven't seen a Neon out here in a while, right? And,
Yeah.
you introduce yourself and, hey, welcome to the show kind of thing. And, like, just that general camaraderie
Yeah.
was just so cool. Even with the people you didn't like. Like, it was kind of cool. Like, I had a rival. I thought that was, kind of fucking neat that there was some asshole on the track that would probably try and wreck me. Like, that was neat. At the end of the day, like, that's fun. You don't really get that in sim racing. You don't get him, coming over to your pit area, and you don't get, the officials, holding people back in the pits when the wrong guy gets wrecked and, he's going into the ambulance and everyone's pissed off. Like, shit, man. Like, it's cool. Even when you're part of it, it's cool.
Yeah. I mean, Ed, that must be like, it must be kind of strange in a way, like, especially when you mentioned the whole rival bit, like, dude, I mean, like, if you've ever been in a fight before, it's more or less the same shit. Like, you talk shit behind each other's back, and then one day it fucking explodes. But this involves, heavy cars and concrete walls, maybe. So, like, it must be pretty incredible, like how you said, even the camaraderie and then having a rival, like, the adventure part of it must be, like, a good almost like 50% of like, okay, this is why I still keep doing this.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
neat.
like there was a week over the summer where I ended up getting a date with the track promo girl who was a few years younger than me.
Yeah.
And I mean, like one of the dudes I was racing with at the time, he had a crush on her, and he was just choked, right? Because he's like, "Fuck, man, Austin beat me to it."
Yeah.
So of course, he sees us at the fucking restaurant. He drives by and sees my car with hers in the parking lot and shit like that. And then of course the next weekend I'm in turn 4 and the car just fucking goes sideways like crazy, and I feel the fucking the slam on my quarter panel. I was like, yeah, I knew what that was for. Like, it was so gay at the fucking time, right? Because you're just like, you asshole, you wrecked me because I went out with a girl you liked. But looking back, it's like, shit, that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And And then when you're driving, you got the stands packed full of people, and you flip the guy the bird. You take your right hand off the wheel, and you don't give a shit, right? And you tell them you're number one.
Yeah.
And like you don't get that. You don't get that in sim racing, and it blows my mind that people wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, if you do get that, it's just a bicker fight that sounds retarded. Like,
Yeah.
like actually, I have a funny story. Since we're kind of on story time, because your story was actually pretty neat. Like, it was something that happened in real life, and then that after you get hit and wrecked, and you're like sitting there like, oh shit, well, that was because this, and this.
Yeah.
And it sounds so trivial, like you said it sounded kind of fucking, it sounded weird, but like at the time at least, because you're pissed off with emotion, but now you can look back and be like, wow, that's pretty entertaining. But I got one for you that happened in sim racing, so we can just, touch both bases. Yeah. Ryan Blaney's spotter, right? Josh Williams?
Yeah.
On iRacing, he can be a little bit of a bastard, I guess, is the best way to use. Because I don't know him or anything, haven't talked to him. I don't know if you've had the experience or the pleasure. But, not too long ago at Auto Club in the A car, he drove me like a bastard. And into turn 1, he almost wrecked me and somebody else. And I was like, way to go, Cletus, because I didn't know who he was, you know what I mean? So I threw out something random and was like, I'll see if he bites at it, because I wanted to have a confrontation almost, because it's fun. But, he basically, anytime that he did something good on the track, he would at me in the iRacing chat and be like, oh, look at that, huh? And I was like, oh, Jesus, we got a comedian over here. And then he ends up winning the race. And then he was like, oh, did you see that? Look who won the race, and look where you're at. And I was like, shit, I lost this battle. And then somebody added me on iRacing, was like, oh, that's Ryan Blaney's spotter. And I was like, you're shitting me. Like, I called this guy Cletus, I was shitting on him, and then all of a sudden you hear that, like, he's involved in the sport. That's sometimes where sim racing can be pretty neat. Like, you don't know who you're gonna meet, and that it's like that in real life too. So they do have like a little bit of contrast, but in real life you're actually there, like shaking the person's hand, being like, what's up, or throwing a fist if you have to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I kind of, there was one season, I think it was 2016, I kind of let my PRC side go a bit. The backstory behind this is there were a lot of part-time drivers in the grid, and just the way EIR sorted the grid is it was like points inverted, kind of like a touring car style. So all the part-time drivers just, they're placed at the front of the grid, and it was just a wreck fest, dude. It was like C-fix top split. It was just, drop the green, and on the backstretch, half the field's around.
Damn.
I got tired of driving through that, so I drove up through the field, and on the podium they do, your driver interviews, just like, oh, like, how was your race? And I'm just fucking pissed because I had to drive through a bunch of wrecks. I didn't want to have to fix my fucking car. Yeah. I was lucky that I got through everything, but on the podium I gave him a piece of my mind, and I got booed. It was awesome. I was like, this is so fucking cool. And I got an email from the track owner on Monday morning being like, people booed you. Like, don't you understand that that's not good? And I'm just like, you fucking kidding me? That was awesome. Like, shit, I'm a villain now. So that's sick.
Yeah, and you know what? For like a short track, that must be pretty entertaining because, like, I mean, you're relatively unknown, I would assume, at a short track, unless, somebody comes there every weekend. They're always watching the races just to, have a day with their family and shit. Like, they start to figure out who everybody is and who they like and who they don't like. The fact that you get up there and you get a microphone in your face and you're like, you know what? That was some bullshit. I hated that. And then there's a reaction in the crowd. Like, that must be pretty fucking exciting. Like, must get your adrenaline flowing because you're like, wow, people are actually, like, paying attention in general. Yeah. That's pretty neat. That's a great story.
Well, and like I said, it blows my mind that, again, some people, not all, but some sim racers will just kind of sit, in their sim rigs and be like, no, like, I really don't want to do that. Like, I'd just rather sit at home, and I can take the Lotus 49 to Ruin if I want, or I can take the Group C prototypes to Le Mans at the click of a button. It's like, yeah, man, but like, there's nothing like shit talking the officials and the whole fucking crowd booing you. Nothing
Yeah.
like it. Like, and I mean, getting onto the late model stuff, like there's nothing like, going on a Friday morning, driving across two provinces to go racing and checking into the hotel.
Yeah.
That's sick. That shit's so much fun.
Yeah, and you know what? Like how you were saying the crowd booed you. Like, dude, could you imagine being obviously maybe you I don't know how much NASCAR you follow, but did you see the whole debacle between Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott at
Oh
Martinsville?
yeah. Oh yeah.
That was fantastic because like you'll never see a crowd more entertained and also involved in a conversation ever again, more than likely, at least for a bit, where you can like physically hear them in the background being like "fuck you" and booing and shit
Yeah.
when Denny Hamlin's on the mic and they can all hear him what he's saying. That shit was really entertaining, and I wonder how it must have felt. They're on the backstretch yelling at each other, and you can hear the crowd probably being like, "punch him in the fucking face!" Like that must be crazy because there's thousands of people out there just either cheering you on or booing you. Like that must be pretty fucking incredible.
Well, that's just the beauty of racing, right? Like it's such an emotional sport.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's something, and I think it's why, going back to a previous topic, it's why sim racing as an esport won't take off.
Yeah.
Yes, there's cars going around the track. Yes, there's racing, down to the very definition of what racing is, just cars competing for position over a set distance. But there's no spectacle to sim racing. There's no way in sim racing to get out of your car after a guy wrecks you and, grab him by the collar and be like, "You're a fucking asshole."
Yeah.
There's no grid girls. You can't smell the hot dogs, cooking in the concession stand if you sit on a certain grandstand.
Yeah.
Like racing is a fucking spectacle. Sim racing isn't a spectacle. Sim racing's 3D models going around the track.
Yeah. That's really true because like how can you there's no way to replicate the scene. Like you can do your best to make the track look nice and the cars feel accurate and look correct and all that nonsense. But unless you have some sort of like there's no way to put out your personality in sim racing unless you drive like a bastard or you're really really nice, like you're passive on the track. Like there's no way unless there were a way that like you would have to create a dumb spectacle to have a spectacle in sim racing, if that makes sense. So an example would be how Iracing, they had a bunch of real drivers do that IndyCar race at Phoenix.
Yeah.
That was a shit show, but it was really fun to watch because you were like, who the fuck's going to win? And anybody could have been taken out in a wreck, but that was kind of stupid, like at the end of the day. Because I remember watching that, and a lot of people were having fun watching it, and I was like, this is kind of fucking dumb, don't you think? Like, they probably are like, what the fuck is going on? But, like, if only there were a way to, like, represent you at the end of, like, a race or something, like with an interview. Like if you're angry at some fucking guy, somebody in a TeamSpeak pulls the both of you up so you can hear a fucking argument or something. There's no way to ever replicate it, which that's the shitty part of sim racing. But if you're a part of real racing, that it's every day. Like every time you go to a track, that can happen. And a lot of the times on TV, they don't even get it. Like you can miss a lot of shit. Somebody, if they're not holding the microphone right into the fucking mouth of the person, you're not going to hear what the hell's going on. Like Joey Logano and Kyle Busch. I wonder what Joey Logano's team was saying to Kyle Busch as they're wrestling him on the ground so he doesn't punch Joey in the fucking mouth. Like, it has to be incredible, but there's no way to replicate it. That's why sim racing probably, especially in the esports category, will never, like, fully take off, I suppose.
Yeah, it's just not enough of a spectacle. I mean, you've got the 3D models on the track, and they are racing, but the event of it, when the Daytona 500's on in a few weeks, there's no giant American flag in the infield with a bunch of troops holding it. There's no pre-race rock show with some country band, on stage.
Yeah.
There's no, trucks going around with the drivers waving to everyone. You can't, as a fan, you can't look across pit road and see all the teams preparing for their first pit stop and see everyone scrambling around. You can't see Chad Knaus throwing his headset down. There's none of that.
Yeah.
It's just a static world.
Yeah.
And the people make racing. You know, at the end of the day, it is a people sport. There's cars there, but there's people driving them, and you don't get that in sim racing. You just see cars, and it's like, well, okay,
Yeah, it's a very sterile environment. Like there's no like there's action on the track, but if you were watching a stream like the peak antifreeze, every time you get to see it every once in a while on YouTube, you can
yeah,
kind of tell when somebody's angry at somebody, they'll swerve at them down, the
yeah,
back straightaway or whatever the fuck is going on. But like you'll never get to hear that like that animosity between each other. You'll never get to hear like the discussion between the team like, oh, I'll let you go because I can tell that you're way faster than me, go win the race. Or the camaraderie is not
yeah,
there, like, and also the event, like you said, like it's just not there. But like for first person shooters, when you're there in real life, like the CS:GO events,
yeah,
if you're watching Cloud9 go against another fucking team, you're like, yeah, dude, that's fucking awesome. Like you can see him playing the game and it's on the screen. The event is there, but like, could you imagine one of them gets up and goes and punches another dude after they get killed by him for like some bullshit or something? Like that would
well,
never happen.
we did have something similar with the Visa Vegas E-Race last winter,
Yeah.
where they had everyone in a room playing R Factor 2. They had all the pods set up next to each other, and I think in terms of we talk about the sim racing lacking a spectacle, that race really did have a spectacle. It was
Yeah.
just at the very end with the controversial finish and the fan boost activating for too long, because you could tell Bono Huis was fucking pissed and he knew the game glitched. And who is the winner? Ollie Pakala.
Yeah.
You could tell he was just like, no, my game glitched and I had 6 laps of boost. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And that made, I don't want to say that saved it because that event was a disaster, but that kind of made it this really interesting, plot to follow. Suddenly you wanted to tune into the stream because you wanted to see what would happen with this.
Yeah.
The race itself was awful, but now you have this storyline developing and it's like, oh, this is kind of neat. And you have all these bright lights and this big prize about to be awarded out, but the finish is fucked and everyone's pissed.
Yeah.
Great, that's great TV.
Yeah. It was pretty interesting because I do remember the look on that guy's face when he finished second. He was like, "What the fuck?" Like,
Yeah.
you could tell that he was like, "What the fuck happened? Like, did I fuck something up, or was the game completely fucked up?" And it turned out to be, the game or well, the mod rather. But
Yeah.
like that was one time where it did kind of like transfer over because there were cameras in people's faces. Like you
Yeah.
could see what the fuck they were thinking without them even saying anything. Like you could read their emotions, but it like you'll never be able to replicate like the crowd and everything like that unless they had some way like you're at a track and you're doing that
Yeah.
type of event like outdoors, like in a little like stadium type thing, like in the middle of
Yeah.
the track. Like that's the only way you'll be able to do it, and like even
But,
then
like,
it won't even be the same.
With esports, no one's going to throw beer cans on the track
Yeah.
as Jeff Gordon's doing burnouts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not going to be some dude climbing the fence at Richmond and just chilling out up there, and NASCAR has to throw yellow. Like, all this dumb shit, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's just none of that. And it makes it, I mean, auto racing by nature is boring. Like,
Yeah.
we watch NASCAR, let's be real here. Green flag runs suck.
Yeah. You're
So
not
with no
joking.
atmosphere to those events, like, what are you really watching?
You're hoping something fucking wild happens most of the time. Like, I find myself enjoying, like, IndyCar racing a little bit more, because when you're watching them on the track, especially at, like, an oval, that shit is exciting. Like, the 2015 Auto Club race that they had was fantastic. I've never seen an IndyCar race any better than that one, and I've been watching it for a long time, you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
racing was fantastic, and it ended up with somebody upside down. You had a really reputable winner that has a great personality, but nobody was at the fucking track, and it was like, what
Yeah.
a travesty. Like, but NASCAR, you're hoping that you have a Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott type situation every now and again, because if not, you're just watching a car with a person do something, which it can be sterile. But if you're at the track, it's always entertaining. Like, I've gone to Talladega when they had that 4 wide finish in 2011, and it was the
Oh,
closest finish of all time. Dude, that was fucking incredible. Like that racing with the tandems, it was amazing. But people on TV, when they were watching it at home, they were like, that shit's fucking boring. And I was like, dude, I was watching somebody from 38th and 39th push each other up to the lead, and then they would fall back to 20th because they fucked up and didn't switch fast enough. Like, that was incredible. It can be sterile. Like, in reality and also in sim racing, but sim racing is way more sterile by, like, a lot. Like, you can see somebody punch somebody in real life, but not in sim racing. All you can do is yell at each other and sound stupid.
we also have an issue when we talk about sterile is what's included in some of these games. And again, from what I mentioned earlier about my buddy getting into Star Citizen and how I've kind of had to read up on that community,
Yeah.
it seems like there's a lot of older guys in sim racing who just hate fun and hate things that would make sim racing really interesting from basically a first person standpoint.
Yeah.
And what I mean by this is, do you ever notice how almost any game with any sort of career mode is kind of brushed aside
Yeah.
and treated as not serious?
Yeah.
And I've found this very interesting just from my personal journey through racing, because like there's stuff that you can't avoid if you want to drive a race car that a lot of these old dudes would say is really boring. Like I mean, for running a Hornet, it doesn't really matter because you're just paying cash for stuff. But when you're running a late model team, you're essentially operating a small business.
Yeah.
So a lot of these career modes, like Dirt to Daytona or F1 2017, where you're having to make decisions about what upgrades you put on the car, and you're having to make decisions, especially in the case of the 2002 World Outlaws games. Where can you afford to travel to race? Do you run the tour or do you run a regional event? All these little decisions, and even like just the travel time to get to certain races. Like a lot of this stuff gets left out or cast aside by the so-called hardcore sim racers. But this is all part of real racing, and I've found it very strange that people want to take this out. And this is actually something I agree with Stefano Casillo of Kuno Simulation with.
Yeah.
Even the stuff like ignition systems, people don't want to do.
Yeah.
And he mentioned in Netcar Pro, the game before Assetto Corsa, he mentioned how all the Formula cars in that game had a starting ignition sequence procedure. So there were certain buttons in the cockpit you always had to press to turn the car on. This doesn't happen in sim racing. Your car is automatically started.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, why would you take this out? Like, part of the fun of running late models is you have 3 buttons to press before the car turns on. Like, it's as dumb as it sounds. It's like you're in a fucking spaceship. It's neat. And it's like, why did you take this out? And the same thing goes with the financial part of it. You know, why do developers, not want to penalize you for crash damage? Why don't they want to have a career mode where there's a budget, for example, where if you wreck your car, you can't afford to run the next race? Like, that's a reality. You hit the wall, it's fucking $700. Like, why can that not be replicated in some games?
Yeah, you're right, because like it would make you feel more attached to the experience. Like Dirt to Daytona, I remember playing that game as a kid, and like, when you go back to it as an adult, you're like, dude, this was a great piece of like, not only a video game, but it's just a great experience because you do have those decisions to make. Like, do I want a better engine? Do I want to buy a better chassis? Like, what would make this car faster for the cheapest amount of money, and then see what I can do with it?
Yeah.
That would be a pretty interesting thing that, like, in sim racing that could be done maybe in the future if somebody comes out and tries to do it, where, like, you have a set budget and you have to start from the very bottom and, like, try to figure your shit out. That would be a pretty incredible feat, but, like, Project Cars, they had that type of system, not necessarily the budget, but like all the different series that you could run. That shit was pretty fun, but you never get that, like, okay, if I fuck this car up, I'm gonna be screwed. I'm gonna have to wait. Like, it could be maybe even a month if I run completely out of money. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do then. That would be interesting if there was like such a hardcore sim that like the physics are like almost 1-to-1, like that'd be awesome, number one. And number two, then you have a budget and you start at the bottom, and if you don't do so well, then I guess you're fucked and have to start over. Like, that'd be pretty awesome.
Well, and the point I'm trying to make is the games that do implement that. For example, Formula One 2017 is a good one.
Yeah.
Dirt 4. And I mean, there's not much in terms of mechanical degradation because if you're good, you just don't deal with a damaged car. But there are a few games that have tried to implement some of those ideas, and the idea of having a budget and that things cost money and things cost time to research. And the games that have done that are just typically lauded by the sim community. And people are like, "Yeah, this is simcade trash. I don't want to play this. I just want to race. I don't want to have to deal with all these things." And it's like, but when you're actually trying to climb up the ranks as I'm doing, like it's unavoidable. Like you are running a small business. Like I've got a fucking folder on my desktop that's just racing documents, and it's fucking massive. It's like sponsorship pitches I've made for other friends. It's receipts of parts we've purchased. It's like travel costs. It's fucking like all this really boring shit. But going back to a word I used a bit beforehand, I feel almost insulted that like you have all these hardcore auto racing fans who are just like, I don't want to do any of that. And it's like, no, but like when you're behind the wheel, you kind of have to,
Yeah. Like if you take one, they love the racing, but then they don't want to have to like put in the effort of actually organizing that shit.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, do you actually want to race? Like, and I'm sure if you ask them, like, hey, you have to make sure that you don't go bankrupt, and you also have to make sure that you keep all this shit for taxes and
Yeah.
all sorts of shit. Like, the majority of them would probably be like, no, fuck that. That's way too much work. And it's like, well, then you don't want to be a racer then. Like, this is not for you then. Because you have to take those. Like, it's a double-edged sword. You have to do it. And that's what's, like if you want to be a racer, you got to do that shit.
I think Dirt to Daytona got close in that, like, even just in the upgrade system. Like, I understand that people don't want to like budget for trips or stuff like that, but I think what Dirt to Daytona did right is that the upgraded parts, there wasn't just stage 1 to stage 5.
Yeah.
Every engine and every transmission and every shock and every spring package that you could buy had both positives and negatives. So there was this little meta game of, okay, like, yeah, I got enough money to buy a new engine, but in the description it says I'm not going to have as much low end torque.
Yeah.
Like I like that is literally down to the fucking letter what we dealt with last year. Do we want engine A or engine B? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it blows my mind that people are when some of this stuff gets implemented in games, people are just like, no, I don't want to do this. This is boring. Like, okay. And like you said, well, do you really want to be in racing then, or do you want to play fucking like Need for Speed or some shit?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like you said, Dirt to Daytona was like almost ahead of their time with that kind of shit, because I do remember that. I remember I had a good chassis, I had an motor, and then I had an okay suspension, and that worked better than having like all the best shit, because you have to take the good with the bad, and I guess that's racing in general.
Yeah.
You have to take the bad with the good and the good with the bad. Like, there's a mixture that you have to have, and if you're not willing to do that shit, then this is not for you, dude. Like, it would be different if, you're talking about football. Like, you have to get in good shape if you want to play football. You have to be on a plane almost every Wednesday, like, for the whole season. And then you get 8 months off, and then you got to figure out what you're going to do then. You're going to sign a new sponsor. What are you going to do? Like, they don't think about that kind of shit until you're, like, in college, and now you're like, oh, shit, that's what happens, isn't it? And it sure enough do. Like, look at all the players that go to college. They played high school, basketball, football, baseball, whatever, for their entire lives, and then they go into college and do it. And then they start figuring out, oh, I got to worry about if Nike is going to want my ass or not. Like, do I fit the part? And then you don't. And then you're like, well, fuck. Like, what do I do? Like, there's a lot of horror stories like that.
I actually remember, and this is totally off topic, but a few of the NCAA games on the Xbox 360 had a feature where you had your campus, your My Player mode or Superstar mode. And like throughout your calendar, throughout the season, there'd be like little almost scenario events where it's like the Thursday before a game, there'd be a dialogue box that pops up, and it's like a couple of your teammates want to go party. Are you going to stay at home and study or party with them? And if you went and partied with them, there'd be like a random number generator that determined, well, you got arrested at the party and you're suspended.
Yeah.
Like some of that stuff would be neat to see in sim racing, but there seemed to be a demographic that don't really want any of it. They just want, a sandbox simulator, and it's a bit disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, they do that for NBA games right now. Like, you're not necessarily in college anymore. You'll be on an NBA team, but they're like, hey, you want to go hang out with fucking D-Rose, or do you want to, go and train and get better at the fucking sport? And you can go out and train with them, and that'll boost your social media. That'll make you friends with other players on other teams. You can try to build contracts with that in the future if you leave whatever team you're at. But then again, it also makes it to where you didn't get enough training, so now your three is going to be off and shit. Like that, yeah, like you were saying, that isn't really involved in sim racing at all. And it should be in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, people are lazy. I think it comes down to people are lazy, and they don't really know the whole scope of like what it is to be a race car driver, I guess, like at the lower level. Like you gotta take care of this shit. But if you're driving for, a Penske or a Hendrick, like they usually take care of all that team shit for you. You're a driver. You just gotta get to the track and shit. Like, that's it. So I like, it would be great to see that, because I would definitely be in, I would definitely like to do that shit, because that's realistic. That's super realistic. It would add a whole new, aspect to the game. Like, a whole new aspect to how you run your career or your season. Like, if you were going for a season, like if iRacing did something like that, that'd be incredible, and they would be the first like real, actual, like, I guess, sim to do that. But that'll probably will never happen. It would be too much work for people.
But I think in terms of innovation, I think developers really should start thinking outside the box a bit.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the games on the market now compared to the games from 2003 to 2006, which is when sim racing really had its golden age, they're no different. Project Cars is really not that different compared to GTR2.
Yeah.
The graphics are better, but it really is just a bunch of cars, a bunch of tracks, and a championship mode or two, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with Assetto Corsa. Like, how is Assetto Corsa really any different than Live for Speed? No, not really.
Yeah.
As a game, no. And you can just go on like this. And I think, as much as some of the community don't want that kind of gamey element, well, like, how many times can we remake the same game? How many different games are we going to get to drive the McLaren 650S at Silverstone? Like, there's going to be a point where people are like, no, we want something to do now.
Yeah. I do agree, because that is completely true. Like, you can play all these different sims, and they're more or less the same thing. Like, the only differences is they look different and they drive different. That's it. And it's like, well, I mean, you can go with an R Factor 2 over iRacing, or you can go with iRacing over an R Factor 2, but like, what is different here? Like, there's not much except for this. I like how this one drives a little bit better, or I like how this one looks a little bit better. I like being able to be on a forum, or, well, I don't. Well, then you don't have to. Like, it's little shit like that, but you are right. Like, older games had, like, the it factor back then. Like, in our 2003, they have a championship mode where you can have a season and everything, but there was never, like, any choices that you could make. There was never, like, hey, we ran out of tires. Like, you're probably gonna have to drive on some old-ass fucking tires that we had from Dover. So you're probably gonna be slow this week, or whatever happens. Like, that's a shitty example, but the type of situation that you could get caught in, like, that can happen in real life. You don't have the money to afford new tires. Well, here's some scuffs from a test that we did. Like, try to do something with them, I guess.
I think what really blows me away is that a lot of these older golden age of sim games I played the shit out of in middle school.
Yeah.
And now I'm 25, and I've gone through 2 console generations, and I've gone through how many games of Madden or NHL or FIFA. And, I've watched Call of Duty grow up and, go from being, universally loved to universally hated. And then I jump back onto racing sims. And it's just like, dude, this is the same fucking game it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
and I'm playing a new game, right? I'm playing. Uh, let's use an example. You know, what was Dirt 4, or maybe that's a bad example, but maybe it's not. What did Dirt 4 do differently than Dirt 2? Here's some cars, here's some tracks. Like or fuck, what else is out there? Automobilista.
Yeah.
How much different really is Automobilista compared to R Factor, the original R Factor?
Yeah.
Like it's a good mod. Like I bought R Factor when I was 13, 14, and now I'm 25 and I bought R Factor for like the eighth time. They were just called different games.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you serious?
I actually do really like Automobilista though, because
I do too.
their devs seem to actually like really care about how shit drives. Like I've heard some not necessarily um the Brazilian stock car drivers,
Yeah.
like Rubens, he tried to say like this is pretty good when it was the not called Automobilista. I almost forget what it's called
Stock
now.
Car Extreme.
Yeah, Stock Car Extreme. He pushed it and he was like, "Yeah, I like this. I let my kid race on it." And then, that video came out like 2 years later where he was sitting in the car with his kid and he's driving an actual car and he's like crying holding his hand and shit. Like that's real cute. But like yeah, I do agree. Like I'm pretty sure I've driven like 10 different versions of R Factor, and like that engine is really, adjustable. Like it's Gmotor 2 is a great engine, but like how many different times can you rebrand it and say like this is what it is and it get fucking old? Like you said, there's going to have to be a point in time where like they have to think outside of the box, these developers, for sim racing. Like something new is going to have to be added, or like they're going to fall away more or less. Like whoever comes in next and does something different, it's either going to flop or it's going to do great. And like I feel like they don't want to go outside that realm, because like you don't want to make a shitty game because people just don't like that you have to do so much work. Like that would suck. That would actually like send your company under and be fucked up for a bit.
Well, I mean, the classic story is Richard Burns Rally, right? Richard Burns Rally is generally regarded, even to this day, after Dirt Rally, as one of the best rally sim, bar none, even compared to Dirt Rally. And it sank the company, right?
Yeah.
So everyone's kind of got that in the back of their mind, I think, where if they try something radical like that, because RBR was pretty radical for its time. No one really had gone out of their way to make a hardcore rally sim like that. But I think now everyone's looking back at that and being like, we can't make RBR. We can't make something really radical to shake things up. We've got to do the paint by numbers approach.
That's pretty true, because like if you've never actually played RBR, anybody who's listening or watching this back later, like, dude, treat yourself. That game is fantastic. Like, I still watch people do playthroughs of it all the time. Like, Jimmy Broadbent had an updated mod for it. Oh, dude, it was awesome. I loved watching that shit. It was fantastic. And it made me want to play it because I was like, dude, that looks really fun. But Richard Burns Rally is a fucking challenge, boy. I tell you what. Like,
oh, yeah.
If you try to figure out, like... It takes forever for you to like learn a track perfect, and then to set like a perfect lap. Like it's fucking hard, and it's a great sim. Like if you want to challenge yourself, treat yourself, lady. Like go play that game. It's fun. But yeah, like you were saying, like who's gonna? If you had to guess, who do you think would like probably go out of the realm and try to do something new? Like if you had to guess between a couple of sims, like who do you think would do it first if they had to?
I hate to be like the company shill, but I think it's going to be us. I think it's going to be SMS.
Yeah.
Just because in terms of team size, I think you know what? Actually, no, I won't be a shill. I'll say it's either going to be SMS or Milestone. Have you seen what Milestone's coming out with this year? Man, that stuff looks sick.
Actually, no, I don't even know who that is, to be frank.
Milestone is the company that made all the MotoGP games.
Oh, yeah.
And then they made the MXGP games. So in about a week from now, actually it'll be a week to the day, they're coming out with Monster Energy Supercross. And it's been almost 18 years since an officially licensed American Supercross game. I think the
Yeah.
last one was Supercross 2001 on the PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
I'm jacked for that. I'm so excited. I don't even watch Supercross a whole lot. I can name like 5 riders,
Yeah.
but it's just something so different that it's just like I'm game. Like sign me up. And there's a track editor and everything. I'm so excited. And then the second one they're coming out with is Gravel, which aside from the really stupid name that should have never been picked, I would have gone with something lame like off-road trucks extravaganza. Anything's better than fucking Gravel. But the actual content of that game, and just here's some environments, here's just a random list of off-road cars, here's some okay physics and nice graphics, go nuts. Like, that looks cool. It really does. And I mean, with Stadium Truck Racing not really having a dedicated game since like Leadfoot,
Yeah.
which was old as shit, I'm stoked, man. That looks so cool. So it's either going to be SMS because of team size, or it's going to be Milestone because Milestone just went crazy this year with random shit.
Yeah. That, you know what, that's pretty interesting because you tried to rep the comp and then
Yeah.
have to change it. No, I would have been totally okay with you saying SMS because they have done some interesting things in the past, like when they had it to where they had so many cars in Project Cars 2 that like you could start from the bottom, but they let you like go all the way to the top if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And that was like, I can see why they did it because like they gave you a middle ground. Like if you want to start from the bottom and actually like drive cars and feel like you're doing like a
You're role
progression,
playing a career. Yeah.
yeah, like that was neat. But then they also gave you the opportunity to like, okay, I understand, but like I just want to race the really fast cars. They accommodated for that, and that was sweet. But like they're really, like you said, there really does need to be a game where it's like, okay, you got to start from the bottom. You got to be smart. If you fuck
Yeah.
your shit up, you fuck your shit up, dude. Like,
Well,
you gotta
in terms
wait.
of unique games, the reason why I say SMS is, in the hunt to kind of take that title, is because if you look at what they did with Shift. Now, I don't like NFS Shift Vanilla, so I have to put that disclaimer out because people are going to be like, "You're an idiot for saying Shift 2 is good." No, Shift 2 is not good. Shift 2 with mods, however, is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a team that put Forza on the PC 7 years before Forza went to PC.
Yeah.
So, in terms of a company that can actually sit down and make something unique, well, I'm sorry, but like, for the amount of people who didn't like Shift 2 for one reason or another, once you get the mods into it and you kind of unfuck the handling and you put a bunch of the Ferraris into it and you put, some of the camera mods and the view mods and all the little like tweaks and the community patches and that shit, it's like, wow, this is pretty good. This is almost better than Forza 7. Like, what
Yeah.
the hell?
That's pretty interesting. Dude, like, that's a great question to ask, and it just popped into my mind after you talked about mods, but, like, how important do you think that modding communities are for simulators? Because, like, specifically myself, like, if you go and look at R Factor, the original one, like, dude, there are so many mods out there that the game stayed alive for years, like, way past its lifetime. NR 2003 is another good one. Mods have kept that game alive for a really long time. Like, I play both of those games all the time, and I'll go back to, R Factor every once in a while. I can go drive a 2017 sprint car if I wanted to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can go and drive a 1979 F1 car if I really want to. Like, there's so much in between. Like, how much do you think modders are important to sim racing?
Oh, they're almost the lifeblood
Yeah.
of the whole genre, because even if a dev releases a game that's not very good, like in the case of Shift 2 Unleashed, or even if the developers, I mean, for lack of a better word, mess something up, like in the case of NASCAR '03, you can fix it.
Yeah.
And you have these guys working on it who just don't give a shit. They'll just play it every day and they'll try and fix it every day. And you can eventually have something that's incredible. And that's before we get to the content. I mean, if you want a crazy example, I was around during Monster Truck Madness 2's heyday.
Yeah.
And I watched that game go from this like random 90s arcade racer with just trucks and ridiculous tracks and stuff to like a full-blown Monster Jam encyclopedia with like authentic one-to-one recreations of stadium events and like online leagues with that. It was just wild.
Yeah, a lot of people use Roar for that actually now. Like, um, I almost forget like what Roar's actual name is
Rigs or
because
rods.
yeah, Rigs of Rods. Jesus, dude, I'm old, but dude, that game is amazing for monster trucks from what I've heard. Like that, like you said, and I like the word that you use for it because that's really accurate. Like modders should be like relatively respected because they like keep a game alive. Like it is the lifeblood of a certain game if you allow people to mod your game. Like so when you have games that don't really necessarily allow for mods, do you think that can be a good thing or that hurts them in the long run?
Well, I mean, mods always open up the door for cheating, right?
Yeah.
But it really depends on what kind of vision the developer's building and what kind of product they're trying to put on store shelves. Like if you're trying to make a smorgasbord simulator with just a bunch of cars and a bunch of tracks, the ability to add more cars and more tracks is always welcome. But like a game like F1 2017, are mods really needed when the core game is just that good and that finished and that polished? No.
Yeah.
But I find it. I'm very happy you brought up Rigs or Odds because I also watched that game, that game's Monster Truck Community Girl, because I was a part of it, and that
Yeah.
was unbelievable to be a part of in its heyday. Because for those who don't know what Rigs or Odds is, it's basically this like freeware physics sandbox. And honestly, I don't really know any of the names of people who mod for it, but it's such an obscure indie game with like no user interface in game, and like it's just awful to fucking install and configure.
Yeah.
But there's essentially a monster truck league that spawned from the ashes of MTM2's demise, and I was a part of it for the first few seasons, and it was incredible. We're talking, we had live officials, we had full length 2.5 hour events, dude. That was some of the best online racing I've ever been a part of,
Yeah.
and it's really a testament, like you said, to what modders can do for a game. Because this is a game that people would basically just drive buses around and use like cranes to pick up shit. And
Yeah.
we were hosting like basically North American monster truck tournaments and that shit. It was wild.
Yeah, Roar is a testament, like you said, to how modders can not only like change a game because, like you said, it is a bitch to install that game and
Yeah,
actually to get it working to
it's
what you want to
awful.
do. Yeah, it sucks, but like the mods, when you see one that you really want to do, and you're like, dude, okay, so the crash physics for that game, the soft body physics, fucking fantastic. Like people all the
Yeah,
time will be like if BeamNG Drive and Rigs of Rods and other sorts of soft body physics games could like actually come together and make like some sort of sim racing game along with that, like how crazy would it be to be able to have like such realistic looking like not only crashes but just like the ability to be able to rip the front bumper off of a car or rip your front wing off. Like dude, that would be awesome. Like the slightest bit of damage could, cause a downforce reconfiguration of the car. Like it makes it drive bad, or if it made it drive better, or whatever. Like, dude, there's so many possibilities for sim racing, and it's sad that like none of them have ever been explored in that way. Like how you were saying with the career mode, and I also feel like that way with how Rigs of Rods and BeamNG are with their crash physics and their damage physics. Because like, dude, I couldn't imagine playing a game where like if you barely bump the front end of your car and it just completely breaks it. Like F1 games have really finicky damage mods that you
yeah.
can download, and those are awesome. Like you can end your race, dude. A tire
I
can pop
believe
off and you're done.
I believe BeamNG was actually built as something that developers could buy as like an injection into their code for the either the damage model or vehicle physics. I believe that's why it was built in the first place. And then it just kind of grew into this like sandbox game. I might have to check with my buddy on that because he knows more about BeamNG and Rigs or Rods than I do. But I swear, I remember when it came out, it wasn't so much of a game. It was just like a tech demo that they wanted to license out to different companies, and because it never caught on in the intended way, they kind of had to morph it into this game. And it's a great game. I gotta be honest, it taught me how to drive a stick. It's
Yeah.
the best transmission model I've ever seen in a game.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
So I guess at the 2 hour and 45 minute mark, I haven't even looked at our YouTube chat. Has there been any like questions that we just haven't answered, and people are like,
Unfortunately, no. A lot of it's been people talking to each other and overall discussing what we were saying in general. Um,
okay,
but there was one comment that I did see at the time that it was posted when we were talking about, or when I was talking about, basically the demonstration idea with Parker Kligerman.
yeah,
Somebody happened to leave a comment and say, they're demonstrating ideas, not how it's gonna work. Like kind of like how MBD can't speak NBC did in the early 2000s with the EA games. That's true. I agree with that.
the EA games, it was more of just here's what the track looks like. Because I remember they'd have someone driving Benny Parsons' car, and
Yeah.
they'd just be like, here's a lap of this racetrack in this video game, and it was presented more or less as a paid advert. I don't remember it
Yeah.
being like you can play your video games and then people train on these and go into a real car. Like it was very much just they would play the bridge riff from Metallica's Fuel, and
Yeah.
they'd have remember they the it's like
Yeah.
the I forget what the proper name of the riff is, but yeah, it's and they'd show Benny's car going around the track, and it was
Yeah.
just kind of like a novelty thing. But this it's kind of like they kind of push it more. It's more in your face. It's more, hey, look, real drivers play video games in their spare time, and they can use it to train for real racing. And it's like, okay, but like, I know that they kind of can't.
Yeah. I do agree because then you would have like, of course, during the NBC broadcasts and the TNT broadcasts, you had fucking Wally's World, where Wally Dallenbach, a fucking race car driver, would get into an underpowered stock car and be like,
Yeah,
here's some danger spots on the track. Like
yeah,
that's more
that was
important.
cool.
Yeah, like, and Jeff Burton does it now, and
Yeah,
that's pretty neat, but it doesn't have like the same kick. I think it's more or less the nostalgia, but also Wally Dallenbach was such a fucking character, and he still is. Obviously he's not dead, but I mean, like, he you know what I mean, like,
yeah,
you know, I wish we did have, if there was a sim that was so good that they could do shit like that and be like, oh, this is how it feels. Like, you go on the actual track with the real car and then come to whatever sim it is and then do it again and be like, wow, this actually feels really similar, and it not be some, dishonesty, then that would be fantastic. But that's
yeah.
just not the reality, dude.
So speaking of, I guess to round out with the final topic of discussion for the night, because goddamn, we're turning into like an NFL game here in terms
Yeah.
of length. NASCAR '03. This
Yeah.
is probably what we should cover to end the show. And I
Ye-
mean, anything from physics wise to modding, like man, I could talk about this game for hours. Like this is my childhood and my present, you know?
Yeah. I mean, dude, it's such a great, like, as a base product when it first came out. I bet people were like shitting their pants, dude, because
I
that game
remember
is so good.
I remember getting the demo,
Yeah.
and you gotta think the culture in 2003 and where sim racing was at. Like we had EA's F1 2002,
Yeah.
F1 Challenge I think was in the pipeline, but there was really nothing like NASCAR '03 when it dropped. It just nothing felt like it had that level of physics fidelity. The AI, especially compared to the EA ISI games, was
Yeah.
out of this world. And I remember the demo; it really just had like 12 cars, and you could run Dega or Michigan,
Yeah.
and it was unreal. Like when you'd crash, it looked like the real fucking thing.
Yeah. That was with the physics that were kind of broken too. Like before they really fixed them up like almost perfect. Like I remember getting the demo like in 2007, I think, just dicking
Yeah,
around with it. And like I remember having to look on YouTube like how to do a blowover in NR 2003 demo, and then people were like, "Oh, you can set the weather to negative like how you would with the regular game, but it doesn't really work that way because it was like the 1.0 patch, not the 1.2. Like it was different." So they had forethought back then, and they were like, "This does not look right. Let's
yeah,
try to fix this." And they recoded it and then put it out as a patch that everybody could download. Like, and it wasn't even that big. They did such a good job. They had like the future intended for that game, but not to
Yeah.
the extent that it is now. It's 15 years fucking old, like
It was
yesterday.
it was incredible to because I was young at the time, but I was good enough with computers that I was able to watch the game grow from launch day,
Yeah.
and it was just so wild to see the community just explode in popularity. I mean, I lurked NASCAR Net back when it was called NASCAR Net and not NN Racing, and
Yeah.
I remember just watching the community transition from painting NASCAR '02 cars to NASCAR '03 and just seeing the design changes and seeing like people make predictions about the '04 Nextel Cup season, and guys were putting out car sets with like completely fake contingencies just because they could. They wanted to be the first one to make their shit,
Yeah.
and like it was even neat seeing like how the game just kept growing in size. Even with all the attempts to kind of shut things down, because at first there was the attempt by EA Sports to kind of monopolize the NASCAR license,
Yeah.
which they did. And I remember when NASCAR Sim Racing, that PC only title, was set to come out,
Yeah.
no one was interested in it.
Yeah. That's actually pretty. Why do you think that was? Like,
Well,
do
but up at that point, everyone knew sim racing would be based on the F1 Challenge game, which is the
yeah.
ISI motor physics engine. And people had tried making oval track mods for either F1 Challenge or GTR2, and they're always just awful.
Yeah.
And people said, like, look, this isn't the same as NASCAR '03. It's just not. And people said, screw it. Like, I remember there's to this day there still aren't any cars for NASCAR sim racing on NN Racing, which is the biggest site for add-on cars for NASCAR games in total, really.
Yeah. That's
And
pretty
then
neat.
with the iRacing stuff, with some of the litigation that came against the community, that didn't deter anybody.
Yeah. No.
It really didn't.
Yeah. There were still a lot of people. Like, when did the GTP mod come out? That had to have been like 2004 or 5 or somewhere around in there.
I remember '05, and I
Okay.
remember having GTP 1.0.
Yeah.
And the shitty thing is, I was too young at the time, because you got to think, if I'm, let's say in '05, I'm like 13 or 14,
Yeah.
so I'm not exactly the greatest road course driver, and I have no idea what the fuck Group C racing is.
Yeah.
So it didn't really like resonate with me, but I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I heard like a week after uh, the mod was up for download that they were in legal trouble, and I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and it wasn't even like over the physics. It was over like the paint schemes. That was some weird shit. Like, there's no way that like. Do you think that they used the physics editor back then? Like, was that even around back then? Like,
I think so, and I think that's why it was kind of heralded as this very important status tool, which is really how I obtained it
yeah,
from Todd. But I remember like I kind of followed that story, and it was more or less, and I agree with what iRacing actually did in terms of this litigation, is the guy who made the either the physics editor or something to do with like the open wheel mod. The guy who coded the no CD hack, rather,
yeah,
was part of the beta team,
yeah.
and he used what he knew through the beta and his inside knowledge of the application to basically make a no CD patch.
That's pretty
And
wild.
iRacing came after him, and they had every right to come after him, because that was kind of scummy.
Yeah,
It's one thing if you're just this third party Russian dude like hacking a game, but like to actually be a paid staff member and like reverse engineering, you know, a core portion of the game to basically give it away for free with some open wheel mod, because I think it was like the OWR 2005
yeah,
that he gave it away with. That in my opinion, that's pretty scummy.
yeah. I mean, I can definitely see how it would have stiffened their craw a little bit because or sticking, excuse me, but
Yeah,
how it would have fucked with them because like. That's pretty fucked up. Like you hired this dude to help you
yeah,
out and dick around, and then they go and take that knowledge and then, you know, put it towards their own project. And not only that, but give out your last game pretty much for free because now it's a template. Like now
yeah.
I know how to do this shit because I can backwards engineer this, and now everybody can have the game for free. Like yeah, I can definitely see how that's pretty wrong.
But I think the other lawsuit, and you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, or someone from Iracing or that crowd might have to correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe they didn't win the other lawsuit, which was about over like the actual physics mods.
Yeah.
I might have to do some more research on that, so like don't quote me on this or anything. But I remember because there were two lawsuits. One guy won, one guy lost. They were both named Tim, and that's why it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
But no, I remember back to the actual story I was getting at. I just remember both of those instances like not deterring anyone in the slightest.
Yeah.
In
No.
fact, it actually made people who were excited for iRacing to come out explicitly avoid the game and stick with NASCAR '03.
Yeah. I'm actually not entirely sure. I think the second guy lost the lawsuit.
Yeah,
I'm almost positive because I remember on iRacing's site they used to like have that page where it showed like them talking about it. I'm pretty sure he lost, but the other guy didn't. Like the first one.
yeah,
Then again, yeah, don't quote me either because I'm not entirely sure. But but yeah, like, dude, I love NR 2003. I still fuck with it every day, and the fact that you were the guy that released the physics editor out to the public for everybody to do, whatever they wanted to do with the physics editor, like that's the main reason why like I've stayed playing NR 2003 for so long, because like if I wouldn't have found the physics editor, I would still do league racing to test myself and everything because that's still
yeah,
always fun. That'll always be fun. But like to stay interested in the game is difficult. But when you have that and you have like not necessarily full control, but like a decent majority, like, and it's right at the tips of your fingers, and you can do whatever you want and make it work, like that's pretty fucking fun. Like that'll keep you around for a long time. And so like back then, if people were getting sued and shit, like yeah, you can be excited for iRacing because it seems like they're trying to keep things under wraps and like maybe this game will come out and be NR 2003 #2 or whatever. But like um I really feel like the reason why people stayed with NR for so long is because like you can do whatever you want at all times. Like, and not only that, you can mod in whatever you want. You can adjust the physics whenever you want now, at least. I don't think it used to be so wide open. I'm pretty sure, because now there's like, I swear
yeah.
to God, I've seen so many different physics projects that like, it's incredible. And it's for sure helped me out, because there's a lot of people that now watch, my streams because I started doing that and I was open with it. A lot of people didn't used to be. It used to be like a hush hush, just release the EXE when you're done with it type thing.
Yeah.
Instead of like watching the progression of the EXE and like what you have to do to get around certain problems. It's almost like a puzzle. It's so fucking fun. Like NR is so great.
The person we have to thank for releasing the EXE is actually a guy by the name of Todd Weaver. I was the guy who posted on Reddit, but I had to obtain it somehow, obviously.
Yeah.
And the story behind how I got that EXE is just insane, because that is actually where some of the sim racing design drama comes into play. And this is going to get super boring for people who aren't into the NASCAR '03 community. But I was also the guy to make the NASCAR '03 encyclopedia. Now I'm kind of a loser, so I've been over the years just collecting some of the full car sets and like interesting stuff that's been released for the game. So on my spare hard drive, I've had a shitload of just like basically every NASCAR ARCA or like Winston West / NASCAR Euro Series car set, just on my computer. And because at least at the time in 2014, a lot of the sites that hosted this stuff were, going the way of the dodo. For a new player coming into this game, it was really, really difficult to build up an install of NASCAR '03 and, have it, replicate how you see people talking about this game, where they have every car under the sun and every track under the sun. So I basically bundled up my collection of shit and just uploaded it. And Sim Racing Design started issuing like DMCAs, basically for me uploading a mirror of NASCAR '03 files that were hard to find. And
It's pretty crazy.
And like this, don't worry. Like I explain how the EXE editor gets released, But anyway, it's basically myself and a couple guys from another racing forum I was on at the time versus like sim racing design and like, for lack of a better word, like their ragtag group of autists, if you know what I mean. And so I'm like, I create a site on Tumblr called the NASCAR 03 Encyclopedia. I upload all my shit and it gets DMCA'd in like 4 days. So I create a Wix site because I'm just at this point I'm just going to like different websites that are free, right?
Yeah.
And upload my stuff on there again and get DMCA'd again. And of course I'm logging on to SRD to see because there's like fucking threads about how horrible the NR03 encyclopedia is and how I've stolen everyone's work and shit like that. When no, I just downloaded the stuff that I found for this game and then uploaded it somewhere else, so it was just a fucking giant archive you could easily browse through.
Yeah.
And as I go through the thread, they keep calling me this guy named Todd.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my name's not Todd, my name's Austin. Like, I live in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And they start posting pictures of this dude who's like 40 at some bar, and they're like, fucking Todd, piece of shit trying to undermine sim racing design. And I'm sitting there like, bro, I'm in Canada. My name's not Todd. I don't look anything like this guy. Like, what the fuck? And it turns out this entire site has it out for this guy. And of course, I run the story on PRC because this goes on for about a year. So eventually I have PRC up and running. It's like 2015. And I just straight up, I run the fucking story.
Yeah.
I'm like, all this weird shit is like happening in the NASCAR 03 community. There's a bunch of old dudes who are like stalking this guy from Oregon. And it's just a big fucking mess. And like, this is what's happened to this really amazing game. And basically I stood up for the guy and said, like, this dude didn't even do anything wrong. This site's just full of like absolute creeps. And I mean, we must talk for like a year, just, on and off through emails. And he'd be like, hey man, thanks for, sticking up for me. I remember like one of the last times we talked over email, he's, as a gift almost, he's like, I want you to have this. And I was like, what is this? And he's like, this is the illegal NASCAR 03 physics editor.
Woo.
And I'm fucking like looking at my email inbox and I'm like, that's going on Reddit in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And I posted it on Reddit for Christmas and I just left.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I have no idea if anyone's going to know how to use this, but here you go. And I fucking come back 6 months later and there's a whole fucking community around it. And I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, dude, honestly, like, that thing is so fucking complicated, because I remember, like, the notepads that are inside of it basically being like, this is how to use it, this is what this and this and this does. I was like, dude, this is fucking, like, I don't know, it's cursive, like, I can't read this cursive, I don't know what they're talking about, but thankfully, like, other people, especially for me, like, I was able to talk to other people, and they were like, hey, man, this is what this, and this does. This is where the draft line modifier is. All this great stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. And I just went and dicked around with it until I got something that I was like, oh, okay, so I think I can replicate this, and that. Like, dude, the community around physics editing, at least from my perspective, is like, it's usually pretty good, but the people on the outside is where it gets real finicky. Like, they're not like sim racing design types, which, by the way, the fact that they were hitting you with DMCAs for uploading shit that, other people uploaded, that is not their intellectual property. The fact that they were being able to DMCA you is pretty wild. And I would be really angry about that shit if somebody ever did that to me. I would probably want to shoot somebody.
Well, I mean, it's not like I don't have the cars on my hard drive, right? And I'll probably do it again at some point.
Yeah.
But
it's crazy that, like, they were doing that. It doesn't surprise me though, because sim racing design is kind of run by, like,
losers.
Yeah, they've never been happy that in their entire life and kind of shit like that. Like, the typical, like, if they're a bully, I'm gonna say this, and that about them. But for them, it's true. So, like, whatever, but they can't take criticism or anything like that. Even now, like, it's still wild over there. But anyhow, yeah, like, the physics editor, it like you said, it has spawned its own community. Good thing you put it out there, because, like, now it's it's a freeware game, so they don't have any reason to get really angry unless like
Yeah.
you actually cracked into the exe and fucked with it. Um,
Well, the argument iRacing used back then, because I read through the document for PRC purposes and stuff like that, and the argument iRacing used, I don't agree with it, but it kind of makes sense from a legal aspect because when they were making iRacing, there were a lot of people who didn't want, who had heard through the grapevine what Papyrus was planning. The paid subscription, the really jacked up cost, the licensing system. There were people who just wanted to play it as a fucking video game. They
yeah,
just wanted to load up their favorite car, their favorite track, and go. And iRacing's argument was, okay, there are enough people who don't really want to try iRacing. They aren't on board with what we're proposing just yet. And if there's some sort of like physics tool out there, these people will straight up not play our game because there's a chance the community might be able to make something on par with what we're making.
yeah,
And whereas iRacing, let's be straight up, they've succeeded in amassing a very large following. If you have a game that's built on basically the same engine and it drives better and it has modding capabilities versus a game on the same engine with, very big costs and a subscription fee and all that stuff, that might not be a good venture for you. So I kind of get why they did what they did. But now, of course, like, let's be real, it's a couple hundred kids just playing around on Reddit. Like, is that really going to make a dent in what iRacing does? No.
that's pretty interesting because what's funny is that I was talking about an IndyCar exe earlier in the podcast, if that's what you
Yeah.
want to call it.
Yeah.
Dude, like I don't think I've ever driven on an exe for NR that feels any more like iRacing than that one. There's little things here and there that aren't the same, of course, but like for the IndyCar on iRacing, like if you get that car in the air, it tends to like try to slam its body back down on the ground really hard.
Yeah.
And like in a very specific way, it almost kind of like swan dives a little bit. That dude's EXE does the exact same shit. Like
That's interesting.
he's
Like you're talking about the 2005 one, right?
no, there's a guy named Steve that's making a
Oh, okay.
DW12 EXE.
Okay, the new one then.
Yeah, he hasn't released it yet, but I mean his is really close. There's something missing somewhere because the tires aren't the same and the suspension isn't the same. But Jesus, man, like I've never driven on an EXE that was that like it's almost like its bastard stepchild of like the DW12 on iRacing, but on NR 2003. It's really good. Like I really like that EXE. I hope he puts it out soon. That's what I was doing in the stream the other day before you came in, that EXE.
Yeah.
It's a lot like iRacing, like a ton, except without the fucking like crazy DW12 glitch that they have when the suspension breaks and it sends you fucking twirling around, which they still haven't figured out. I can't understand why. I would never let that car be on track if it was that broken. Like if you hit the wall and your suspension breaks, you break dance for 30 minutes, but whatever. I mean, his EXE is really good. I've never driven an EXE like that. We're getting into that time where like iRacing did make a pretty good assessment, being like, okay, this isn't gonna hurt anybody, but also if they did figure it out, it would kind of fuck us over.
Yeah.
They probably should watch their back. Like I've done enough EXE stuff like from other people to know that like people are getting close, like kind of scary close. But there's always just that one thing missing. Like, and it's in the tires. Whatever they're doing with the tires is different, but people are getting close. Like it's weird.
That's definitely what I wanted to talk about next, is just how unbelievable some of the EXE mods for NASCAR 03 have been. Because I mean, like I've ran a buddy's account on iRacing. Like he's given me his login info. No, iRacing, I didn't steal his account. Stop.
Yeah.
But no, I have. I've turned laps. Within the past few months. Of course, for the PRC article, and I've run the Sportsman late model they have at places like Langley and at places like the Vegas Bull Ring, which there's a chance we might travel to and race at in the next couple of years. And I've been WTFing pretty hard at my computer monitor, as have some of my friends who have let them try, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I want to say it was either last night or the night before. I jumped on NASCAR '03, and I always have it installed. I always try and keep it up to date. And I was dicking around. I downloaded the new Monster Energy 2018 Cup Series mod, which I think is by Splash and Go Graphics.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yep.
And there's a track in there called it's either Showtime Speedway,
Yeah.
and it's this little bull ring by Wild Customs and Cars, and it's identical to Quesnel, which is the last track we raced at in 2017. So I load up the 2017 Physics CXC that I think it was you who worked on,
Yeah.
and I ran our setup in our car,
Yeah.
straight up. Same shocks, same spring, same sway bar, everything, and it was within half a tenth. Same track dimensions, roughly same what's it called? Same track dimensions, same banking, same way to enter the turns. And I was just like doing like 25, 30 lap runs, and I'm just like, oh my god, it's like I'm back in my fucking car. I couldn't believe it. And then, I started messing with the setup, and I was just like, holy shit. And like I don't mean to like jerk you off all over this and shit like that, but it was, when you talk about people getting mighty close, it's like, no, you're right. And I mean, I'm very lucky that I'm one of the few who gets to experience that sensation. But it was unbelievable where it's like, no, this is the line I run at Quesnel. This is exactly where I brake. This is where it feels like the car gets tight and I have to wait for it to set on the bottom. This is insane,
Yeah. I mean, dude, like, I can't, I put so many hours into that project, like, it's kind of wild. It went from 2015 all the way till now. I still dick with it all the time, trying to figure out new things with it. The fact that it translates over to something is great to hear, because, dude, like, the amount of hours that I fuck with that thing on YouTube, I haven't even posted the amount of hours that I've done with it, because, like, if I would have done that, it would be the only thing that I'm posting, and that gets boring. People don't want to watch that all the time, so I try to space it out as much as possible. But even when I'm just sitting here talking to my friends and we're not doing anything, I'm always fucking with that shit. Like, I'm always trying to change something, make it better, fix the ride height if it needs to be done. Like, the fact that it translates over to something is pretty good, because, dude, the amount of hours, it's wild. It's over probably like 200, 300, 400, somewhere in there. Like, it's been a lot. And I've played this game for years, so I tried to take what drivers were saying, and then I also took, like, all the numbers that needed to be accurate for body shape, and the downforce more or less was subjective, because you don't even know the real downforce numbers for NASCAR and all that nonsense. But dude, I've tried my best. So the fact that it works for somebody, for something, and it's accurate, like, muy caliente, that's very spicy.
Well, like, and I mean, we were talking earlier in this broadcast about, like, all the weird things you have to do in iRacing to go fast, and all the weird setup glitches. It's the crazy thing about NASCAR 03 is that you don't have to.
Yeah.
I can, like I said, we can, over the off season, even without the Physics EXE, Dustin literally put in our car's setup and just sent it to me over Facebook. And he's like, these are the springs we're running in the car this year. This is what I'm going to do with the shocks. Get used to this. And we just, again, for like 2 months, just every night we'd get on the fucking Hamachi server and just run like 100-lap races at Dell's. And that was how we practiced.
Yeah.
And it was like, there was still like, okay, after each stint, he'd be like, oh, you notice how the car does this? It'll do this in real life and not feel quite like this. Like, it's just insane, what this game has done for me in my career. And it's something I'd really like to talk about, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, we're at that point where people don't really want to talk about the technicality aspects. They just want to use real drivers training on something as a marketing thing.
Yeah. That's the unfortunate bit, but like, maybe someday we'll have no reason to complain. Like, could you imagine that there would be no reason to be like, what are we doing here? Like, what? Like, I don't think it's ever gonna happen, but that would be pretty neat. Like, it would just be something that drivers used, and other people could use it, and it's just that's what it is. It's there to the public. Like R Factor 2 Pro or whatever, they can put in real life numbers, and apparently they use that for Chevy, and
Yeah.
Ford still uses fucking R Factor 1, which is weird for their simulator, but apparently it works. Like, you know, I wish that kind of shit was available to the public, but we don't got that, so we kind of have to stick with what we're at. But dude, I wish there would be a day where we didn't have to complain, because I'm right there with you, where like you can complain till you're blue in the face, but people just don't really care. As long as I can jump in and do this and that, then I don't give a shit. And
Well,
it's like, well,
some of it is just a mentality kind
yeah,
of thing, because everyone always wants to play new video games. But I mean, when you look at what the Flight Sim community does, the Flight Sim community still plays Flight Sim X, which came out in 2006. And why do they do it? Is because it's really good. I
yeah,
don't understand why, if people are so unhappy with stuff like Project Cars or stuff like Assetto Corsa or stuff like iRacing, like why isn't there more of an effort to go back and install these games? Like especially with NASCAR 03 getting physics updates now, which some people waited over a decade for. With those updates coming, if you're so unsatisfied with iRacing, which I know a lot of people are, or you're so unsatisfied with let's say R Factor stock cars, which again a lot of people are, there's nothing stopping you from playing an old game.
yeah.
Especially if it's that good.
Yeah, especially in R 2003, because the community is still like, I mean, I'm gonna level with you here. Like, I've been
Yep.
in the sim racing community for a long time, and I've made mistakes, and I'm stupid as
Yep.
well. But like, dude, that community can be so toxic that it's crazy, and everybody in it knows that. Like, it's with any community as well, but like being in the NR community for so long, it can be really toxic. It can be really bad. But like, when you find that little niche that you're looking for, there's tons of people that do the same shit.
Yep.
And they're all there. Some of them are there for the same damn reasons. Like, if you don't like iRacing, NR is right there for you, man. Like, you can
Yep.
go and do that, and you can find what you're looking for. Um, it just, yeah, like you said, like, why aren't people taking an approach of like, okay, I hear a lot of good things about this game, I'll go to that one, instead of being so discontent with, iRacing or Assetto Corsa or Project Cars 2 or whatever it is. It just depends on what you're looking for. Like, there's tons of them. You just got to know where to look and find it. Go on some forums. There's
Yeah.
some people with strong opinions.
Well, I think one of the problems too is that in terms of sim racing as a whole, in terms of why you don't really see much activity around any game, even the bigger ones, is that a lot of people in this whole genre just can't drive.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this is the last topic we'll cover before we call it a night because it's fucking late.
Yeah.
But I mean, in my travels, I've driven tons of different leagues. I've won like iRacing championships, not the Peak Series, of course, but like the Series championships. I've raced monster trucks. I've drag raced online for an event. I've done rally leagues. I've done at least a league in every major sim aside from maybe GTR 2.
Yeah.
And the one thing I've noticed about the community is not that the community's toxic or not that the community's retarded, even though those are also true. That's not really the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that so few people can drive. And
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter if you sign up for iRacing and you progress up the ranks. It doesn't matter if you join a private league in R Factor 2. It doesn't matter if you join Sim Racing System for AC or a Dirt Rally or a Dirt 4 league or anything really. It just seems like there's tons of people who can't drive. And I'm talking, even some of the YouTube personalities. There's one that was just featured on Red Bull recently, and it was like I looked up her stats because I was curious because they were very they gave her a lot of praise, and it was like the average incident count, which in Assetto Corsa's car on car contact was 3 per race,
Jesus.
and I'm just like, what the hell?
Yeah, that's not good.
And I feel like one of the reasons this community doesn't grow as large as it should, again, it's not because of the toxicity. It's not because the guys who are delusional and think, blowing money on a sim rig is going to get them in a real ride. It's that when you are physically out on the track after practicing, the racing just isn't enjoyable
Yeah.
because a lot of fucking people crash.
Yeah.
And I don't really, I mean, like I could go the elitist route and say like, oh, there's not 15 cars under a second. I mean, I'm talking like, I at least do my part to put in the effort and practice for a race. I don't maybe practice as much as I should, but I'll give it a solid hour, every other night to try and prepare for a league race. And it's very disappointing that in the 8 years I've been doing this, and maybe you can even count some of the old NR03 stuff back in the day when I was like really young. In the 8 years and let's say 1,000 starts, oh my god, it never got better.
Yeah. Even if you're in a league that, especially for NR, because that's more or less what I can speak to.
Yeah,
I'm sure it translates to other games as well, but like even if you're in a league that people, they're supposedly the best league, and
yeah,
that this is where you come to really like test yourself and to see if you're actually up to snuff. Like if you're good
yeah,
as them, even when you're in leagues like that, people will still make the same shitty moves, the all that shit. That it, like you said, it does never get better. Like it, you'll always have those things that people do because people are
yeah,
people, I guess. But like, yeah, it's almost impossible to get into a league where they don't do stupid shit. Where
yeah,
like everybody knows what the car's supposed to do and they
yeah.
drive it accordingly. It sucks. It really does. But like there's some leagues that I've joined personally that a lot of people know what the fuck they're doing, and I don't really have to like beat my head up against the wall every night. Like Voltage Sim Racing for NR 2003 is really good. Like they're
Yeah.
probably one of the better leagues because the people that run it seem to care about it, and I talk to them all the time. Like they're good people, and their league is good, and people relatively know how to drive, and it's small, so like you race against the same people every season. Some people come and go, but like, but then you got another league like FTF is another one, another big giant league. Um, some of the people that race in that league, they couldn't find their right big toe if you pointed to it. Like it just you like the niche that you have to find. Sometimes it's really difficult, but you can get there. But even then, it'll still be fucked up. Like one league can be good, one league can be good one day. The other one that you thought was good could be bad the next race. Like it'll never be perfect.
Yeah.
And that sucks. But I digress. Like it can be fun. I really do feel like if people did branch out to older games like you were saying earlier, if you're discontent with iRacing or Factor 2 or Automobilista or whatever, try one of the older games, man. Like maybe you'll find a community that you enjoy and that their racing is good, the league isn't bad, and people know how to drive. Like maybe it'll happen someday, but it's hard to find it.
Well, I mean, as an example, a group of my buddies, I don't know if you remember, but there was a weekend on Steam where Dirt 3 Complete Edition was free.
Yeah, I have it.
And
Yep.
everyone downloaded it. Everyone. It had like 43,000 people online.
Damn.
And basically, just for shits and giggles, there's about 8 of us, all of us from iRacing or, decent sim racing backgrounds, all joined a private lobby on Dirt 3 and ran like 10 lap rallycross races.
Yeah.
And it was some of the best, most intense racing ever because it was all super talented guys just throwing down against each other. And it's like, well, this could be any game, really. But
Yeah.
then you go on to like place like the sim racing subreddit, and people are like, "Oh, Dirt 3 is that arcade trash where Ken Block's always shouting at you." And it's like, dude, are you fucking kidding me? We went like 3 wide into turn 1 for rallycross and held it,
Yeah.
The
People's
fuck, man, that's insane.
expectation. Yeah, I'm sorry, but people's expectation of like realistic is sometimes like obviously you can be a purist all you want, but like, are you really having that much fun? Sometimes, like,
Yeah.
the fuck, man. Just because something is a simcade and like they think it's trash, it's like, dude, you've probably never sat down and actually like had a good race on one of those games that you supposedly hate so bad because of that fucking mindset that you got. Like you're possibly missing out on a lot of fun, even though it's not the most realistic thing in the world. If you're good at a relatively okay realistic game for sim racing, you go to a simcade, and all the things that you learn to be good at, it does transfer over. It's just not like the force feedback isn't as good. The car
Yeah.
response may be a little bit too slow or a little bit too fast. Like whatever it is, dude, who fucking cares as long as it's fun, like alongside other good people. It's so goofy when they have that mindset.
Well, I think what would blow people's minds is, I mean, like earlier in the broadcast, we talked about how when you transfer over from a sim to reality, like there's stuff you have to learn and not
Yeah.
fuck yourself. Like there's stuff you have to learn about throttle control that doesn't transfer over because some sims get some stuff wrong.
Yeah.
But I think people's minds, especially the sim community, would be blown if they actually got to experience what I experienced personally this year. Was when you have the driving skills I have, and you step into a big boy car. Like, let's be real here, and you start putting down laps, on pace, and you're just like, this is kind of easy. And I
Yeah.
feel like I remember getting out of the car after a test session, and I was like, dude, if like the average person on like Race Department or Reddit just experienced what I felt in that car for those couple of shakedown laps, they'd be like, this is arcade trash. 6 out of 10. I want a refund from Steam.
Yeah.
I'm dead fucking serious.
You know what? That actually is pretty interesting because I can't speak to that as a real
Yeah,
race car driver because I have never gotten to sit in a real race car. I wish I could, but like I was using a Driving Force GT for a really long time, and I just recently got a new wheel or whatever.
yeah.
And like I went into iRacing because I was having so much problems with it with my Driving Force GT. Like I hated iRacing for like a good bit of time. I still don't like it because obviously, yeah, the issues that we pointed out earlier in the podcast and everything. But
Yeah.
like especially after getting this new wheel and then going out on track and then driving around just to see if I, if something was wrong with my last wheel or something. I was driving it and I was like, dude, this is really easy all of a sudden. And like, I don't know if it's the new wheel or like my wheel was just broken or whatever, but like, I was driving on a wheel that didn't have like the desk clamps to it. I was like duct taping my wheel to my desk because like I'm strife for money, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I had to do what I had to do. But like getting this new wheel, I got better when my wheel broke. And I was like, the fuck? I guess it's because I unlearned all my tendencies to pull down on the wheel super hard on my desk and shit. Um, Other stuff like that. And then I got on track with this new wheel, and I was like, this is super easy. Either I've gotten really good, or this wheel is super good. And like, I couldn't imagine doing that in a real car like how you're describing, because like, that must be wild, like where you know what the car has to do and you just go out there and do it and you're like, shit, well, I'm fast, so that was really easy, but I wonder if one of these guys jumped in the car and they felt as good as I did, what they would think. That is a pretty interesting um discussion that could be had if somebody else had that experience in a car, like how it can contrast to a simcade, I suppose.
Well, I remember one of the most interesting things is I remember seeing on Reddit even just a few days ago.
Yeah.
There was a discussion about like how do you deter your friends from like messing with your sim gear because they're saying people are jumping in and like just thrashing about on the wheels, and one guy was like, set your AccuForce direct drive wheel to like full vibration and
Yeah.
let him drive Daytona 2007, and it'll like rip his arms off. And
Yeah.
I'm sitting there and I'm like, but stock cars have like the best power steering systems imaginable, and you don't even feel anything through the wheel. You just feel it through your ass.
Yeah.
So, like, what are you trying to accomplish here?
Yeah. It's definitely counterintuitive because like
Yeah.
even when you run over the little lights on the center of the road in your real
Yeah.
car, like you don't really like feel that in the wheel. Like that's not something that you'll feel it jerk a little bit, but like you won't like feel it as if you're like running over a rock with your own foot or something. It's not
The
like
only
that.
the only time I've felt what I have in Sims of old
Yeah.
in a real car is when the power steering went on my shitbox. And I mean, that's a front wheel drive car.
Yeah.
So you're just like, oh god, this is like torture for 10 laps. And
Yeah.
then you come into the pits and you're like, fix this because it's an issue. That's what jacked up force feedback feels like, and it's always blown my mind to see some of the sim dads be like, no, this is realistic, and they're like driving on their YouTube channel with the fucking FFB trying to rip off their arms, and I'm sitting there like, guys, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. It's goofy because, like, dude, you're never gonna, like you said, your power steering has to go out or something has to be drastically wrong for it to, like, want to kill your arms and shit. Like, people are so goofy. I guess if that makes them feel like they're more connected to the car, then have at it, I suppose. But, like, that's not realistic, guy. That doesn't even make any fucking sense. If you're driving an Indy car, I understand that. Because, like, they don't
Yes.
have power steering. Like, I tend to put my force feedback up on iRacing when I'm doing the DW12, or when I'm in NR, I jack up my my force feedback pretty high, and also in my wheels control panel I do it. But, like, otherwise, like, what's the point? If you're driving a car that doesn't have, power steering, then go right at it. But otherwise, you're just wasting your time. You're hurting your arms. Why you want to do that shit?
And then these people are the same people who are like, Grid Autosport has lap times that are 2 seconds too quicker compared to the real thing. I won't play it. And then they'll just fuck their wheel settings up for immersion.
Yeah, super hypocritical. It's fun to see how sometimes the sim racing community can just be some of the goofiest bastards on the planet. It's super funny. I love seeing that sometimes.
The best example of hypocrisy actually has to do with NASCAR Heat 2.
Oh, yeah?
I think NASCAR Heat 2 is a really good game. I've seen some comments saying NHE was arcade, but there was rage instead of fun. Heat Evolution sucked. Heat 2 was pretty good. I like Heat 2. But what I find funny is that a lot of people wrote that game off as like arcade trash. I mean, it's not even talked about on the sim racing subreddit. It's not talked about a lot on Race Department, and even like the game's official Reddit. It's like 704 Games NASCAR.
Yeah.
There's like nobody on it.
Yeah.
But what I find funny is, a lot of people have written off NASCAR Heat 2 because, oh, it's Simcade. There's a thing where it's like, I think even in Heat Evolution you couldn't change the setups online, but you can in Heat 2, or it's basically like a very simplified version of NASCAR, right? It's not like it's bad, it's just simplified. But then these people who knock NASCAR Heat 2 will go on iRacing and run 25-lap fixed setup races at Daytona in the Truck Series.
Yeah.
And it's like, but why don't you just buy NASCAR Heat? It's cheaper and it's the same thing. Like it blows my mind that like the top, like the most popular series on iRacing is C-Fix trucks, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you can do that on Heat 2. So it's like, why are you paying extra for the same experience? And completely ripping on one game and then vehemently defending the other when both more or less have the same physics problems.
I've never thought about it that way, actually.
Like, it's weird. Like next, really think about this. Like, you have a bunch of people writing off this arcadish NASCAR game, and it's like I could go into a bit of a talk on why I think NASCAR Heat 2 is pretty realistic in my opinion. But you have these people being like, "Oh, I don't want to play NASCAR Heat 2 because it's just idiots wrecking each other at Daytona in every online lobby." What's the most popular online room in iRacing? Carburetor Cup at Daytona.
Yeah, that's true, dude. Like, I really haven't thought of it that way because, yeah, like, what is realistic about the super speedway racing that iRacing has other than, like, you're in a pack of people and you don't know what's gonna happen? Like, otherwise, there's some pretty significant problems, you know what I mean? Like, the side draft is getting better, I guess, but, like, even then, you still can't really do it. Like, the way that they shoot out in front of people in real life is fucking wild. Ricky Stenhouse at Talladega last year, fucking spectacular, the way that he was able to side draft off of the side of Kyle Busch on the front stretch and get way out in front. Like, that was pretty crazy. On iRacing, you can't do that shit. So, yeah, like you were saying, like, the most popular rooms are usually when, like, C-Fix is at Talladega or Daytona or Carburetor Cup at Talladega or Daytona and you're just doing it for fun, like you could easily do that on NASCAR Heat 2 with a group of more or less your friends, so at least you know them
Yep.
and have the same exact experience. That's super true. At least their truck draft is actually pretty fucking nuts. Like on iRacing, their truck draft is stupid. It's not even close. You get such a major speed boost in real life. Like they're going 188 at the front of the pack, and then you can be 17th and going 200. So like what? I don't know. Whatever.
I haven't run plate races on iRacing in years because I mean it was always just because of where my iRating was at. I would
Yeah.
always be placed in top split rooms, and I mean there are some guys who are they're just out there to cause shit. And I
Yeah.
mean like I don't mind wild drivers because it mixes things up, but like I don't want it to be lap 3 of 25 and already be under yellow. That's a joke. I what the fuck.
Yeah. That is something that I've done a lot. Like the super speedway racing on iRacing, I've done it a ton because like if you play those races right, not only will you gain safety rating, you'll gain an I rating, but like now people have started to do it a lot more than they used to. Like there used to be like 2 or 3 guys at the back of the field that'll like stay 5 or 6, 7 car lengths off of the person in front of them, like the main pack, and just wait for them to wreck, and you're able to slow down a fuck ton and miss the wreck, and then it'll be 3 to go, and you're in fucking 7th, and then you'll win the race by chance if you're lucky enough. Like, a lot more people tend to ride at the back now, but dude, I've done that so many times on iRacing that, like, if you look at the contrast to real racing on super speedways, like the way that the draft is different, the way that if you get on the back of somebody, it'll fucking crash them. Like it's not even close. It's not even close. It's kind of sad that it's that far off because I think super speedway racing on iRacing is almost a little bit too popular, and that would thin the herd a tad. So you don't have to go into top split and be like, okay, this is some dude who got the top split in 2012 and he hasn't played in years and now he's in top split Talladega C fixed, hasn't driven the cars in forever, doesn't know how they drive. Like I've heard that happen to a lot of people apparently. Where they'll run one of those races and it's somebody who hasn't been on their account in 3 years. So it's like, what do you do when you get wrecked by them? You can't even get mad at them because it's not their fault. They don't know how the car drives. They don't know the little intricacies, I suppose. But super speedway racing on iRacing, it's fun to do when you got nothing else to do and maybe you want to gain some safety rating, just don't get crashed. Like that's fun, I guess, but otherwise it's pointless. If you wanted to do that for fun, like you said, you could go on NASCAR Heat 2 or you could go on NR 2003 and have way more fun with that shit. There ain't no point. But
So
that's just me.
where should we go now?
That's a great question because actually there were a few people earlier that did ask some questions. Um, I just got to scroll up to them and find them. A lot of people are talking in chat. Y'all are great. Um, Here we go. It's somewhere in here. Okay, so Dustin the Destroyer said, "I missed the beginning of the stream. Is PRC coming back?"
Oh, I guess I'll
Oh,
answer that again. The answer is no. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything left to say, and it was more of an agreement with my boss as well to just kind of kill the site. Not that I was against it, but at the same time, I don't really have anything more to say. And I think everyone who wanted to read the site read it already and understand what points were made. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, when this is up, you can go back and listen to the start, and I explain in a lot more detail why. But it's basically like if you have a website like PRC operating and functional, and investors in the industry or like potential licensors uh, stumble upon PRC articles and they agree with them, that can fuck up backroom business deals for basically everybody. And at that point, it's like, well, do you want this funny little blog to survive, or do you want sim racing to survive? And at the end of the day, I think a lot of people would rather have sim racing to survive.
all right. And then there was one from Swarm Runner that says, "What do you think about the fact they are trying to make physics into something that they may not represent in real life?" Like, so I'm assuming that's about iRacing, whether or not they're making physics into something that isn't represented by real life. How do you feel about that?
Well, we definitely covered this earlier, and I don't think it's a very iRacing centric question because all developers are doing this in their own way. For example, even Dirt 4, where the cars just had an enormous amount of grip, even on the sim difficulty, they're doing it so more people play the game. That I can tell you with 100% truth. That's what's going on. Because as much as race cars are somewhat easy to drive if you kind of go into it with the right mindset and understand how driving a car works, for the average person, they are too difficult. It's a lot to comprehend. And if you make a game that is one-to-one accurate, you're just going to lose sales. And at the end of the day, the last team to actually make a one-to-one authentic simulator, which was I believe it was SCI Games with Richard Burns Rally. That company doesn't exist anymore. Might be SCI or Warthog. But anyways, these games don't sell well enough if you make a full-on 100% simulator. So unfortunately, all developers have to make that choice to make it just a tad easier for people to play it. I don't agree with it. I hate it. But if they did go that route of making it one-to-one, they wouldn't exist at all.
All right. Here I'm gonna try to see if there is another question.
One guy asked who my favorite driver was.
Ooh.
Eminem's. I think it's the stop motion guy. I'm sorry, I don't really like stop motion NASCAR stuff, but he did ask a good question, and I do have some decent stories behind that.
All right.
So anyway, favorite driver. New World's gonna actually like this answer, but we'll start in other racing categories. Off the top of my head, number one favorite driver all time is a guy by the name of Tom Meents. You will recognize that name from Monster Trucks. In terms of retired drivers, it would be Mike Dunn from the NHRA. He used to drive the Mopar car for Daryl Gwynn Racing, and then I believe later in his career he was sponsored by the New York Yankees. Current active drivers, unfortunately, I'm kind of all over the place on this. It's going to be Courtney Force, it's going to be Brad Keselowski, and it's going to be Kurt Busch. Courtney, I became a fan of through the John Force reality show back when she drove. She drove like Super Comp, and they did a whole episode on her where they explained how she basically grew up and understood like why it's not a good thing to be a spoiled rich kid, and they introduced her to how John Force grew up. And it was a really really nice episode, and I really became a fan of her at that particular time. And so yeah, I've basically been following her entire career. I've got a rookie tour shirt, which is now worn the fuck out. Brad Keselowski, I think all of us became a fan during his 2012 championship run. I'm from a Dodge family, so the lone Dodge guy in the field kicking ass and getting drunk in victory lane was awesome. And Kurt Busch, I went through something similar to what he did with Patricia Driscoll, which is what I kind of implied at the start of this broadcast. And I went from not really caring for Kurt one way or the other to like really being on Team Kurt.
Oh.
Other than that, I think that covers everybody.
Well, does anybody else have any questions before we go? Cause this shit almost spent 4 hours, boys. Like Jesus, this is the longest sim racing podcast that's ever happened. So
it's a fucking Tuesday, right? Shit.
Yeah. So if anybody does have any other questions, we can answer those, and then the podcast would technically be over, and we would go our separate ways and be humans. You know.
Charlie says thank you for coming out. Oh yeah, it's. I mean, this is something I've wanted to do for a while, and I touched on before we got going that there were a couple. Offers, not offers, but I was in talks with a lot of bigger channels to kind of do like some sort of interview, but then it just didn't happen for one way or another. I think they kind of realized that me going on like an actual sim racing website. Yeah, so it basically ended up coming down to this because people were, I don't want to say afraid to follow through with it, but they didn't really want to.
Yeah.
Now the questions are flowing in.
Hello, everybody.
Here we go. In iRacing, when in the corners on tracks, the painted line seems to wiggle. In NASCAR 3, it's dead straight curved. Why? I think that's just down to, if you're talking visually, it's down to the track models. I mean, if you look at some of the NASCAR 3 default tracks, like some of the surfaces are smooth as glass, right? Any drivers you dislike? Absolutely. I have to say Danica.
Oh no.
And I hate being like I'm not trying to be sexist or anything, but like I could talk for like an hour on this girl, right? The Joe Rogan podcast made me really dislike her just because she seems a bit aloof. I don't know if that's the right word to say it, but like she didn't really seem to care a whole lot that she was a professional race car driver for 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, she came out and basically said, I don't really understand anything about the cars. I run all these side businesses, but like I just put my name on it. You know, these other people manage them for me. Like that really rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah. I mean, she did kind of do that a little bit. She seemed really bitter, which maybe it'll go away over time and she'll do another one or some shit and she won't sound so bitter. But yeah, about the cars and shit, she didn't even like. I bet you if you explained to her like what camber really does, like if you
Yep.
asked her, she would be like, it makes the thing do that.
Yep.
Maybe
Some
that's why
guy
she wasn't so good.
says, you've often talked about how you wish someone would make a 96 to 99 mod for NASCAR 03. Have you heard of the newly released Winston Cup 98 mod? Yes, I have. I've downloaded it. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm very appreciative that someone made it.
That was Splash and Go graphics again.
Yep.
The guy's channel is FireDog190. If you ever want to look him up, he's like an OG in our video maker type person.
All right.
He's pretty neat.
Cup Series, a stop motion guy with another question. Do you still go to Monster Jam shows? How do you like the current tracks now? That's a two-parter. I haven't gone to a Monster Jam show in a number of years because they hold them at Rexall Place, which is one of the smallest stadiums they go to. Like it's a hockey arena, but it's tiny.
Yeah.
I think the last time I went was 2012, and I filmed the whole show, and I was like, I'm never going back to this.
Was it bad?
Well, like monster trucks are best enjoyed in a football stadium.
Yeah.
When they're in a hockey arena, they can't do anything. There's like one jump.
Yeah, that's true.
How do you like the current tracks now? Oh, don't get me started. I'm very disappointed that they're not using crush cars. I think, and especially because I got to play in a competitive Rigs of Rods league, I got to see and experience the difference in a competitive environment. Crushed cars versus ramps. The crushed cars made such a challenging dynamic that it was one of the most difficult things you could do as a driver was freestyle with crushed cars because you never knew if any hit was going to be your last, and you just roll the truck. But with the dirt ramps they've got going now, it's just boring. I can't watch the shows. Big plans you can announce for 2013. I just scrolled past. Who was that though?
Oh, actually, I don't.
V2.
Yeah, V2.
We're gonna be racing a lot more. I think we ran like 5 or 6 late model races. I think we're gonna try and do 9 or 10 this year. I'm not gonna be racing at my home track. Basically because of the same reasons that make people not race in online leagues, just politics and shit. Trying to work on a novel that I won't publish under my real name or anything like that, but I'm getting through with it, and it's just a personal goal I've had of mine. But hopefully that'll come out this year. I'd like it to. Let's scroll down. Do you guys recommend force feedback wheels for oval sims? From Dennis Bowen. This is a great question because in iRacing, at least, I would turn my force feedback off. In BeamNG, which I also use to practice, I turn my force feedback down to like 1 just so I can feel when the car bottoms out. Force feedback wheels, basically any modern wheel has force feedback, but I don't really think you'll need to go. I don't think you'll need to go hardcore and buy like a Thrustmaster for like $500. You can get away with a Logitech G29. Here we go. Memologist meme. On a scale from 1 to 10, how realistic is the NASCAR 2017 EXE? I'm going to give it a 9. The one point it's missing is NASCAR 03 has this thing with the tires where if you cook them past a certain temperature, I think it's either 225 or 250. New World will have to correct me on that. But once you get the tire, and it's usually the right rear, past 250, the car will just spin out. And it'll spin out even if you're going like 30 miles an hour in a straight line. It's just something happens with that tire model to make the car just completely lose traction. It's like you're hitting a patch of ice all the time. It's kind of realistic because in a real stock car, you only want to push for 4 to 5 laps before you back off because the tires get too hot. But in a real car, when the tire gets hot, it's like, oh, I don't really have the traction I used to. It doesn't slide around like it's on ice. It's just you can't get off the corner as quick. But in terms of making you drive, even though the tire like melts and makes you spin out, the whole concept of you can only push for 4 to 5 laps and have to back off, that's correct. Are you an Oilers fan? What do you think of the Vegas Golden Knights this year? Honestly, I hate the Oilers. A buddy of mine almost got the shit kicked out of him by Taylor Hall back when Hall played for us. I'm actually not kidding about this. This isn't the greatest story, or nor is it appropriate for this podcast. But I mean, we're the same age as Taylor Hall, right? So some of my buddies who'd go to certain bars would run into him. And it's funny because he actually just bought a Hall jersey now that he's traded to New Jersey. I have been watching the Golden Knights season though. Tim Toop, I think this is their radio play-by-play guy. He's awesome to listen to. I think that's everything.
Memeologist meme. Is it okay to edit the NR 2003 XE without Iracing suing? No, they would still probably sue you, dude. If you got the source code, they would sue the fuck out of you.
Oh yeah.
That's where the gray area lies. But the physics editor and shit, that stuff is okay because the game is a freeware game, so you can adjust it. It's if you get the source code, that's where they'll probably try to sue you, because then you would be able to make your own game, and you didn't have to do the proper buying of the source code to be able to make your own game or edit the game. iRacing still uses that same source code, so yeah, they would sue you for that shit. They don't play too kind with that nonsense, I'm sure.
Our boy Memeologist Meme is talking about, I've been working on an AI project for a year. The AI god is pretty realistic. They can pass on the outside and they can battle. But how would I release the track ionized and LP files without DMCA? That's more of just releasing it at the right time and hoping Sim Racing Design doesn't come out and file bogus DMCA claims. That's really all that there is to that.
Yeah. Oh, someone said, how do you save tires on NR 2003? I'm going to raise my hand and tell you. Dude, so one thing about NR that I don't know if it's realistic or not, but, like, you have to pay super close attention to whether or not the tires are fucking screaming. If they're screaming, you're doing something wrong, and more than likely, it's with your right foot. Like, if you plant the throttle and, the tires are screaming, then you're gonna screw them up. So like what I do specifically is I jab at the throttle every once in a while, like, or more or less the entire, like, if I'm doing a league race, that's what I'm doing, because not only does it, like, it takes the load off of the tire, it also points the car going the right way, and it gives you a little bit more turn and everything. Like, it keeps your heat down, but your wear will still keep going about as much as it has to, but that's a good way to save your tires, at least for me. That's what I did. I had to do that shit for years to get it to work right, though. Well, do you want to answer any more questions, or do you...
I mean, like, as long as people can send, like, interesting stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's still, like, tons to cover, but it's just like, dear God, we've been doing this for 4 fucking hours. Like, shit, I need food.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, we'll end the podcast here. Maybe next time, if you ever want to do this again, we can, like, set up a little email and everything, so people can send in some questions that they have to think about for a bit. And maybe we can do a part 2 that are just answering those questions, and I'll upload it as a video or something.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
That would be pretty entertaining, I think.
Definitely have to space it out for some time.
Yeah, for sure.
So we can gather questions. But yeah, it was fun. It was nice meeting you, and like, thanks for all the work you do on the physics editor and shit. Like, it's It's, I mean, it's not like you got to see it, but holy shit, I did some laps. I was like, fuck, man, this is our car.
Yeah. I mean, at least it's working for somebody. A lot of people like to give me shit for it, but if it's working for somebody and they have some real life comparisons to make and it actually works, then that's great. I'm all for it. But it was nice meeting you too, because I was super stoked when you came on the podcast the first time, and then you were dropping some fucking bombs on here, and I was like, holy shit. And I knew I had to have you back. So thankfully we got this done. 4 hours, dude. A 4 hour discussion. Like, holy shit. That's pretty good.
I think it'll be worth it. I mean, I listen to a lot of Tony Kornheiser and shit, and I love just downloading a bunch and just letting it play, right?
Yeah,
But
I do too. I like long stuff. But everybody, thank you for joining in and coming to listen. You've been great. The questions at the end were fantastic. So thank you very much, Austin Ognoski, aka James from Project Race Cars, the now defunct, unfortunately. But that was the podcast. So thanks everybody. See you
peace out,
later.
guys.